The January wind cut through the empty alleys of Bridgeport, carrying the scent of diesel and salt across the industrial waterfront. Once bustling shipping terminals stood quiet, their massive cranes frozen against the steel-gray sky. The 2023 post-pandemic recession had struck this Connecticut port town with particular cruelty. Global supply chain disruptions had rerouted shipping traffic to automated megaports down the coast, leaving mid-sized operations like Bridgeports to wither. Manufacturing had followed the shipping, a cascade of closures hollowing out the local economy. Morgan Reed felt the economic frost as physically as the winter chill while she walked along Harbor Avenue, her steel-toed boots striking concrete with metronome precision. The specialized welding gloves tucked into her jacket pocket, titanium-rated, reinforced palms, custom-fitted to her hands, were worth more than anything else she currently owned. 12 years at Gulf Coast Marine Repairs had earned her the reputation as the finest precision welder on the eastern seaboard, capable of executing perfect aluminum and titanium joins that could withstand the pressure differentials of deepwater submersion. Statistics scrolled through her mind as she approached the employment office. Her third visit this week, 17th this month. Connecticut's overall unemployment rate, 7.2%. Industrial sector unemployment, 14.3%. Female skilled tradespeople, 42.6%. When industries contracted, women in trade positions were consistently first to go, last to be rehired. The Industrial Development Board's quarterly report sat folded in Morgan's back pocket, where she'd stuck it after reading the projections for skilled welding jobs over the next 5 years. Bridgeport, projected decline of 27%. Nationally, projected decline of 12%. Highly specialized certifications like hers, projected demand increase of 4%, concentrated entirely in aerospace and military applications. Sectors that required security clearances she didn't have. Morgan pushed through the glass door of Workbridge Employment, the electronic chime announcing her arrival to a receptionist who didn't bother looking up. The waiting area held 3 other people, a young man in business casual attire, anxiously reviewing notes, an older woman methodically filling forms, and a middle-aged man in faded workwear similar to Morgan's own. After 22 minutes, the receptionist finally called her name. Morgan took the familiar chair across from the employment counselor's desk, already knowing what she would hear. The woman, Tracy, according to her nameplate, tapped at her keyboard with lacquered nails, scanning a screen Morgan couldn't see. I've sent your qualifications to 16 positions in the tri-state area over the past month. We've received 7 responses. 5 filled the positions internally. 2 indicated they're looking for candidates with commercial building experience rather than marine-specific skills. I understand your frustration, but we need to consider a wider range of options. Have you thought about retraining? Morgan's mind calculated automatically. 6 weeks without income, plus program costs of approximately $2,200 for a certification that would qualify her for entry-level work at $16.75 per hour, less than half her former wage. Meanwhile, her mother's outstanding medical bills totaled $17,453.26. Her mortgage payment of $1,642 was already 15 days late, and Duke's medication cost $72.85 for a 30-day supply. The counselor continued reviewing her screen. Aerospace Dynamics in Hartford has an opening that matches your welding certifications, but it requires an active security clearance. Have you ever considered applying for clearance? The process takes about 6 months for basic levels. 6 months. Morgan thanked the counselor with practiced politeness, took the printout of potential positions, and left the office. Outside, the temperature had dropped further, the early afternoon sky already dimming toward winter darkness. Her truck, a 2008 Ford F-150 with 173,842 miles on the odometer, waited in the parking lot. The engine coughed twice before catching. The road home took her past Gulf Coast Marine Repairs, its compound sprawling across 8 acres of waterfront property. 4 vessels currently occupied the repair slips, fewer than half the capacity. Through the chain-link fence, Morgan could see figures moving between buildings, welding helmets glinting in the wan sunlight. 12 years of her life behind that fence, learning every vessel type from recreational crafts to commercial fishing boats to mid-sized cargo ships. Her father had started her on welding fundamentals when she was 14, recognizing both her natural aptitude and the changing economic landscape. Frank Reed had witnessed three industrial contractions during his 42-year career, surviving each by specializing in skills that couldn't be easily outsourced or automated. Precision welding of non-ferrous metals required both technical knowledge and tactile sensitivity that machines couldn't replicate. He'd pushed Morgan toward aluminum certification first, then titanium, finally underwater applications, each specialization narrowing her competitor pool while increasing her hourly rate. The strategy had worked until 3 months ago, when Gulf Coast's contracts had dropped by 62% in a single quarter. The layoff had been presented as temporary, just until business improved. Then Morgan had watched as 17 men were called back at reduced wages, while she and the only other female welder received formal termination notices. Her union representative had filed a complaint, but the case remained under review, with no timeline for resolution. Morgan turned away from the shipyard, accelerating onto Harbor Avenue. The eviction notice had arrived yesterday, a certified letter requiring her signature. Payment must be received within 72 hours to avoid formal proceedings, 3 days to produce $3,084.36, current month's rent plus 2 months of arrears plus late fees. The bungalow appeared at the end of Cypress Lane, its faded yellow siding visible between winter bare branches. 940 square feet of 1940s construction, poorly insulated but structurally sound. The covered porch her father had rebuilt 10 years ago still stood perfectly level despite harsh coastal weather. Morgan had purchased it 7 years ago at the height of her earning potential, the mortgage manageable with her then salary of $78,400 annually plus consistent overtime. Duke's bark greeted her from inside, though noticeably weaker than even a week ago. The 9-year-old Labrador had been steadily declining since his cancer diagnosis 3 months prior, the same week as Morgan's layoff. His once robust frame had thinned dramatically, ribs visible beneath his dulling coat. The latest medication had barely improved his appetite, and his breathing had developed a whirring rattle during the night. Morgan moved through the half-empty house, navigating around stacked boxes containing everything she'd already packed in anticipation of the inevitable. She'd sold the furniture that held no sentimental value through online marketplaces, each sale bringing temporary relief followed by deeper dread as the funds disappeared into basic necessities. The kitchen table, oak with turned legs, a wedding gift to her parents in 1978, remained covered with paperwork organized in precise stacks. Medical bills, $17,453, 26 total, spread across 3 hospitals and 6 specialists who had ultimately failed to save her mother. Mortgage documents, loan balance $127,000, current arrears $3,284.36. Utility notices, electricity, $147.92, water $82.17, heating oil tank at 22% capacity. Bank statements documented the relentless drainage of her savings. The emergency fund that once contained $8,437.22, built meticulously over 12 years, now showed a balance of $983.71. The transaction history showed her mother's initial hospitalization, then the diagnosis, then the specialized treatments insurance, classified as experimental. After the layoff, the withdrawals had accelerated. Mortgage payments, property taxes, Duke's veterinary care. Duke whimpered softly from his bed in the corner, struggling to stand. Morgan knelt beside him, running her hand along his side, feeling the prominent ribs and the mass beneath his skin that had grown despite treatment. The veterinarian's words from last week echoed, "We're past the point where treatment will extend his life meaningfully. Now we're just talking about comfort care until it's time to make that difficult decision." The decision crystallized as she felt Duke trembling beneath her hand. There was no money for additional treatments. Even palliative medications would be exhausted within days. Morgan pressed her forehead against Duke's, breathing in the familiar scent of him. That night she slept on the floor beside his bed, one arm draped over his thinning frame. His breathing came in labored bursts, each intake catching slightly before releasing. By morning, the decision was necessary. Duke could barely stand, refusing even water. Pine Ridge Veterinary Clinic occupied a small, converted house 5 miles from Morgan's bungalow. Morgan carried Duke from the truck, his body frighteningly light in her arms. The receptionist, Elaine, whose children Morgan had once coached in community softball, looked up with immediate understanding. The veterinarian explained the procedure with gentle precision. First a sedative to relax him, then the final injection that would stop his heart. Morgan's hands never stopped moving through Duke's fur. She leaned close to his ear, whispering memories only they shared. The time he'd stolen an entire pot roast from the counter. How he'd chased waves at the shoreline. The night he'd slept with his head on her chest after her father's funeral. The first injection took effect within minutes. Duke's eyes, clouded with age and illness, remained fixed on Morgan's face as his body relaxed. When the veterinarian returned with the second syringe, Morgan nodded her permission, continuing to stroke Duke's head as the medication entered his system. His breathing slowed, then stopped. The clinic had reduced the fee, $175 instead of the usual $250, but it still represented 17.8% of Morgan's remaining funds. She carried Duke's body, wrapped in his favorite blanket, to her truck. The afternoon stretched before her, empty and cold as she drove to St. Michael's Church where her parents were buried. Behind the main cemetery stood an ancient oak that had survived 3 hurricanes. The groundskeeper loaned her a shovel without questions. The January soil fought her with every strike, frozen in the top 6 inches, densely packed below. By the time the hole reached 3 feet deep, Morgan's hands had broken open despite her welding gloves, blood mixing with dirt on the wooden handle. She placed Duke in the earth, tucking his blanket around him before beginning the slow process of filling the grave. Each shovelful fell with a hollow sound that echoed the emptiness spreading inside her chest. That night, Morgan couldn't return to the bungalow. The absence was too raw, the silence too complete. She slept in her truck behind the church, engine running intermittently for heat, waking stiff and cold as frost coated the windshield from the inside. The church's small bathroom provided basic washing facilities, though the water ran cold after 30 seconds. The eviction notice specified noon as the deadline for either payment or vacancy. Morgan drove to the bungalow with the precise intention of a person executing a long-planned operation. 3 hours to dismantle a life built over 9 years in this space. She moved methodically, selecting only what would fit in her truck and what could not be replaced. Her welding equipment came first. The specialized helmet with custom ventilation modifications, the titanium-rated gloves, the precision tools that represented both livelihood and identity. Next came clothing, prioritized by warmth and durability. Her mother's quilt. Her father's watch, still keeping perfect time after 30 years. The kitchen table would have to stay. The bookshelves, the remaining furniture, the framed photographs too bulky to transport, all would be surrendered. Morgan stood in the center of the living room and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of unrestrained grief. Her father's watch tracked the time precisely. When the minute ended, Morgan loaded the final items, handed the keys to the waiting landlord, and drove away without looking back. The financial calculation was simple and brutal. After the veterinary fee and fuel costs, her bank account held $768.43. Average daily expenses for basic survival, food, hygiene necessities, truck maintenance, would consume approximately $27 per day. Timeline until complete resource depletion, 28.46 days. Bridgeport's transformation from manufacturing hub to hollowed shell had accelerated over the past decade. The 2008 financial crisis had closed 3 factories that never reopened. The pandemic had shuttered 2 more, along with dozens of supporting businesses. The current recession had picked off the remaining vulnerable operations, creating a downtown dotted with empty storefronts. Morgan navigated this changed landscape with detached precision. The coffee shop where she'd worked during college allowed employees to leave vehicles in its back lot overnight, a mercy offered by the manager who remembered Morgan's reliability 15 years prior. This became her temporary base, a place to legally park while she formulated next steps. The public library provided internet access and warmth during operating hours. The truck stop on Highway 15 offered showers for $7.50, a necessity she allowed herself every 3rd day. The community center's bathroom became her morning washing facility, though she varied her timing to avoid arousing suspicion. Meals consisted of items requiring no preparation. Protein bars, apples, peanut butter sandwiches consumed quickly in her truck. Each morning, Morgan checked employment listings with methodical thoroughness, applying for anything remotely matching her qualifications. Each afternoon, she visited potential employers in person, resistance building with every receptionist who took her resume with practiced smiles that never reached their eyes. We've had over 70 applicants for this position. Your experience is impressive, but perhaps overqualified for our needs. We'll keep your information on file. 7 days after the eviction, Morgan's phone displayed an incoming call from Gulf Coast Marine Repairs. Her heart rate accelerated as she answered, hope flaring briefly. The foreman's voice carried the uncomfortable tone of someone fulfilling an obligation without conviction. We're calling previous employees about a temporary position. 3 weeks of work, standard aluminum repairs on a fishing vessel. The rate is $22.50 per hour. Less than half her previous wage. No benefits, not even guaranteed full-time hours. But the calculation was immediate. 3 weeks at approximately 30 hours per week at $22.50 per hour would yield $2,025 before taxes, enough to extend her survival timeline by 75 days. Morgan accepted without hesitation. The temporary position ended after only 15 days when the contract was completed ahead of schedule. The foreman avoided eye contact during the final payroll processing, sliding the check across the desk with a mumbled comment about being in touch if anything else came up. The net amount, $1,243 after taxes, represented a critical extension, but nowhere near stability. By February, Morgan's carefully managed funds had dwindled to $642.31. The truck, serving as both transportation and shelter, began showing signs of potential failure. The transmission hesitating between gears, the brake pedal developing a whirring softness. A mechanic's assessment confirmed her fears. Repairs would cost approximately $840. Without them, catastrophic failure was likely within 500-700 miles. Morgan chose the middle path, addressing only the critical brake issues for 307 inches, leaving the transmission concerns unresolved. February brought intensified cold, temperatures regularly dropping into the low teens overnight. Sleeping in the truck became an endurance test, requiring the engine to run for 10 minutes each hour to prevent hypothermia. Morgan calculated the fuel consumption precisely. Each warming cycle consumed approximately 0.17 gallons. At current prices of $3.78 per gallon, each night cost an additional $1.93 in survival overhead. On a particularly bitter Tuesday, with wind chill pushing temperatures towards zero, Morgan sat in the truck stop parking lot calculating remaining resources when a familiar figure caught her attention. Jack Fisher emerged from the service entrance, still wearing the Gulf Coast Marine Repairs uniform, navy coveralls with the company logo embroidered in white across the back. When he turned toward the lot, his eyes met hers through the windshield. Recognition, followed by visible discomfort, crossed his features. For a moment, it seemed he might pretend not to have seen her. Then his shoulders squared slightly, and he approached her truck with the careful neutrality of someone unsure of their welcome. Morgan rolled down the window, the blast of cold air immediate and shocking against her face. Jack stopped 3 feet away, coffee steam creating a small cloud between them. His discomfort manifested in shifting weight and eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. Heard about your mom. Should have reached out. And Duke, too. Thompson mentioned seeing you at Pine Ridge. Rough times all around. Morgan nodded, acknowledging the belated condolences without comment. The silence stretched until Jack cleared his throat, voice dropping slightly as he continued. Listen, the yard's clearing inventory. Old shipping containers mostly, some damaged in transport, others just outdated models they're phasing out, selling them at scrap prices to clear space for the new security contract. Under $1,000 for most of them. Fin and accounting can work the paperwork if you've got somewhere to put one. The suggestion bordered on absurd, a homeless woman purchasing a shipping container. Morgan nearly laughed at the cosmic irony. The dismissal formed on her lips, then halted as memory surfaced. Her father pointing to a magazine article 8 years ago discussing container architecture. Strongest small-scale building blocks available to the public, he'd said. Designed to stack 8 high fully loaded in hurricane conditions at sea. With proper modifications, They'll outlast standard construction by decades. How much? The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise Jack. $850 for the better ones. Less if you don't care about condition. They're just looking to clear the yard before the quarterly inventory. Morgan calculated quickly. Current bank balance is $642.31. Recent paycheck not yet deposited, $1,243.17. Total available funds, $85.40. A container at $850 would leave 1 through 35, 48 yards, enough for approximately 38 days of basic expenses, excluding any housing costs. The financial logic argued against the purchase. The survival instinct, the part of Morgan that recognized she couldn't continue indefinitely in the truck as temperatures fluctuated and her body absorbed the cumulative strain of inadequate rest, whispered that a more stable shelter might represent the difference between enduring until employment improved and complete collapse. Can you get me in to look at them? Morgan arrived at Gulf Coast Marine Repairs at precisely 9:57 a.m., parking across from the main entrance rather than in the employee lot she'd used for 12 years. The guard barely glanced at her through the shack window, waving her through after she mentioned lot clearance. The container storage area occupied the northwest corner of the property, separated from active operations by a secondary fence. Approximately 30 containers stood in neat rows, their surfaces displaying varying degrees of wear from ocean transport. Morgan noted the identification markings automatically: manufacturer codes, structural specifications, cargo classifications, information absorbed through years of working with marine shipping. Jack appeared at 10:05, leading her toward the back of the lot where older models had been consolidated. He pointed out obvious damage with professional detachment: corrosion around door seals, stress fractures near corner fittings, deformation from improper loading or transport incidents. Morgan assessed each container with the precision her father had instilled, calculating repair requirements against potential value. Most showed significant limitations: severe rust penetration, compromising structural integrity, water damage to flooring, deformation that would prevent proper sealing against elements. Morgan rejected these automatically, recognizing false economy. In the third row stood several containers in better condition. Jack stopped beside a standard 40-foot model painted faded blue, its surface bearing the marks of international shipping companies partially obscured by surface oxidation. This one's decent, some surface rust, but the core structure is solid. I checked the certification plate. It's rated for marine transport until 2025, so the integrity is verified. Corner castings are intact. Doors seal properly. Floor shows minimal water damage. Morgan approached slowly, welding gloves pulled from her pocket. She ran her fingers along the corrugated steel sides, feeling for inconsistencies beneath the surface oxidation. The welds along structural seams remain solid, oxidation limited to surface layers rather than penetrating to base metal. The corner castings, critical connection points that bore the weight during stacking and transport, showed no signs of stress, fracture, or deformation. The doors opened smoothly on well-maintained hinges, revealing an interior that smelled of sea salt in distant ports. Morgan stepped inside, boots echoing against the wooden floor. Light filtered through ventilation openings near the ceiling, creating dappled patterns across the metal walls. Near the far end, her fingers traced a small marking stamped into the wall: CMA CGM, followed by a serial number and manufacturing date. Morgan froze, recognition triggering immediate recall. She'd worked on this specific container series 8 years prior, modifying them for specialized offshore equipment transport. Her welds would be on the reinforcement plates near the corner castings. She moved to the nearest corner, crouching to examine the steel plate bolted to the internal frame. There it was, the slightly distinctive pattern that had been her signature long before she recognized it as such. 3 perfect, uniform welds with the characteristic spacing that instructors had used as examples for newer students. "How much?" Morgan asked, emerging from the container to find Jack waiting by the doors. $850 listed. Finn could probably get it down to 8. I'll take it. The transaction proceeded with surprising efficiency. Finn from accounting processed the paperwork without asking questions. $800, cash or bank transfer, for 1 standard shipping container, as is, no warranty expressed or implied. Morgan watched the bank transfer complete, her account balance dropping to $1,080. $85.48. The logistics proved challenging. Transport alone would cost approximately $600 for local delivery, nearly 55% of her remaining funds. Jack suggested a local hauling company owned by a former shipyard worker who might offer a discount if Morgan assisted with the loading process. Martinez Hauling operated from a small lot near the industrial district. The owner, a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard, listened to Morgan's situation without interruption. When she finished explaining, he nodded once. I can do it for $300, but only if you help secure it for transport yourself. Standard rate is $550, and I'll need cash. No paperwork, no tax complications. Morgan agreed immediately, scheduling transport for the following morning. Now she needed somewhere to place it. The vacant lot behind the abandoned gas station on Mercer Street hadn't been her first choice. The location, a weed-choked patch of gravel and dirt partially hidden from the street by the gas station's crumbling brick structure, represented her only viable option after 6 hours of searching. The property owner agreed to a monthly rental of $200 with minimal paperwork. I don't care what you do with it. Just don't cause problems with the neighbors and don't expect any services. There's no water, no electricity, no sewer connection. And I want first month's payment before that container touches my property. Morgan transferred the $200, watching her bank balance decrease to $885.48. The mathematics of survival adjusted accordingly. Approximately 32.8 days of basic expenses remaining, assuming no additional costs. The container now represented both her largest asset and her most significant liability. Shelter that itself required protection from elements and modification for habitability. The next morning dawned clear but bitter cold as Morgan met Martinez at the shipyard. The loading process required precision. The container, weighing approximately 8,120 pounds empty, had to be lifted carefully onto the flatbed trailer using the yard's crane, then secured with chains at exactly the right tension to prevent shifting during transport. A small crowd gathered as the trailer backed into the vacant lot on Mercer Street. The woman who ran the laundromat across the street, the man who owned the convenience store on the corner, teenagers who should have been in school but weren't. They watched as the container was lowered to the ground, the impact sending vibrations through the frozen soil that scattered pigeons from the gas station's broken windows. The placement required 3 adjustments before achieving proper leveling. The ground, uneven and partially frozen, created stability challenges that would need addressing before the container could serve as safe shelter. Morgan noted the issues automatically. Southeastern corner sitting 2.7 inches lower than the others, northern edge positioned too close to the property line, western end facing the street, doors exposed to public view and prevailing weather. Martinez completed the placement, handed Morgan a handwritten receipt, and departed without ceremony. She stood alone beside the container, her container, as the onlookers began to disperse. One teenager lingered, phone raised to capture video. Morgan turned away, refusing to become entertainment for strangers. The reality of her situation settled around her as the February sun began its early descent toward the horizon. She had shelter of a sort, 4 metal walls and a roof that wouldn't leak, doors that locked securely from the inside. She also had no heat, no water, no electricity, no bathroom facilities, and $585.48 remaining to address these deficiencies while maintaining basic survival needs. Morgan climbed inside the container, closing the doors behind her to shut out curious eyes. The interior temperature registered approximately 22 degrees, according to the small thermometer she carried, actually colder than the outside air due to metal's efficient thermal conductivity. The floor radiated cold through her boots, despite the thin plywood covering the steel base. She sat with her back against the wall, knees drawn to her chest, and allowed doubt to wash over her for precisely 3 minutes. Her father's watch counted the seconds. 3 minutes to acknowledge fear, uncertainty, potential failure, no more. When the time elapsed, Morgan stood and pushed the doors open. The dying light painted the lot in shades of amber and gray as she returned to her truck. She collected the sleeping bag, backpack of essential clothing, battery-powered lantern, and small camping stove that had served as her survival kit since leaving the bungalow. These she arranged against the far wall of the container, establishing a temporary base camp within the larger space. That first night tested both physical endurance and psychological resilience. The temperature inside the container dropped to 12 degrees by midnight, metal walls serving as conductors rather than insulators against the February cold. Morgan wore every layer she owned and still shivered violently inside the sleeping bag rated for 20-degree of conditions. Sleep came in brief intervals between shivering episodes, dreams fragmented by cold-induced discomfort. By midday, the first video had appeared on the local community Facebook page. Container Lady moves to Mercer Street. The footage showed Morgan entering the blue box with her meager possessions. Comments accumulated beneath it. Is that even legal? Pretty sure you can't bush live in a shipping container in a residential area. Who chooses to live in a metal box in February? Something's not right there. That's Frank Reed's daughter. Used to be some hotshot welder until the layoffs. Guess she's hit bottom. Morgan focused instead on immediate survival priorities. The container's most critical deficiency was insulation. Metal's high thermal conductivity meant that without proper barriers, internal temperature would remain within 3-5 degrees of external conditions, making nighttime survival questionable as temperatures continued to drop. A small automotive shop 6 blocks from the container offered 3 hours of cleaning work, paid in cash. Morgan swept floors coated with years of accumulated grease and metal shavings, organized tools thrown haphazardly into drawers and cabinets, scrubbed a bathroom that hadn't seen proper cleaning since its installation. For this, she received $35, enough to purchase minimal insulation materials if sourced creatively. The hardware store's dumpster yielded unexpected resources: damaged insulation panels discarded due to torn packaging, partial rolls of reflective barrier with cosmetic damage, a nearly full tube of construction adhesive past its official expiration date. Morgan collected these after dark, loading them into her truck with efficient movements. The second night incorporated the first improvised improvements. Reflective barrier attached to the ceiling reduced radiant heat loss through the most vulnerable surface. Damaged insulation panels positioned against the northern wall provided minimal thermal buffering against prevailing winds. The sleeping bag placed atop a salvaged moving blanket created marginal separation from the cold floor. These modifications raised the interior ambient temperature to approximately 19 degrees F, still dangerously cold but representing a critical 7-degree improvement over the previous night. Morgan woke to the sound of laughter outside the container doors. 3 teenage boys stood in the weak morning light, phones raised to capture her emergence. She recognized one from the previous day's spectators, his face alight with particular cruelty. "Yo, container lady, how's the 5-star accommodation? Got indoor plumbing in there?" Morgan said nothing. She stepped out, closed and locked the doors behind her, and walked away as their laughter followed her down the street. At the corner store, she spent $4.27 on day-old bread and a jar of peanut butter that would stretch across several meals. The owner, less hostile than the previous day, nodded toward a coffee maker near the register. "Help yourself. On the house? You're Frank Reed's daughter, right? Your dad fixed my delivery van about 10 years back. Wouldn't take full payment because he said it was a simple job. That day established the pattern of those that followed. Wake at first light. Use public bathrooms for basic hygiene. Search for work to generate income for survival and critical container modifications. Return to the container as darkness fell. Implement whatever improvements, materials, and funds permitted. Sleep surrounded by metal walls that creaked as temperatures changed." The videos continued to appear. Someone used a drone to capture aerial footage of the container from above. Another filmed through a gap in the doors when Morgan had left them slightly open for ventilation. The most popular showed her heating beans on the small camping stove, captioned, "Bridgeport's Hobo Chef opens new restaurant." The comments grew increasingly personal. "That's Frank Reed's daughter. She thought she was too good for regular welding jobs, only wanted the specialty high-pay stuff. My cousin worked with her at Gulf Coast. Said she always expected special treatment because of her father's reputation. Heard she blew through her mother's life insurance on some get-rich-quick scheme. That's why she's living like this." That night, rain found every vulnerability in the container's structure. Water seeped through door seals where rubber gaskets had deteriorated, dripped from ceiling vents not properly angled for drainage, pooled in low spots on the metal floor. Morgan's sleeping bag grew damp, then sodden. The salvaged insulation developed a powerful mildew odor as moisture penetrated its paper backing. By morning, everything Morgan owned was wet, cold, and increasingly unsalvageable. The rain continued for 3 days without interruption, revealing critical flaws in the container's condition. Rust accelerated around seams where protective paint had worn thin. The wooden floor began to swell in areas where water accumulated. The small camping stove refused to light in the damp air, eliminating Morgan's only heat source. On the fourth day, as water continued to drip steadily, Morgan reached her breaking point. She gathered her wet belongings and fled to her truck, driving aimlessly through Bridgeport's gray streets. When the truck's fuel gauge dipped toward empty, she parked near the community center, hoping to find a quiet corner to dry out and reassess. The woman at the reception desk took one look at Morgan's condition. Soaking wet, carrying a dripping sleeping bag, dark circles beneath her eyes, and shook her head. "We're not a shelter. There's one downtown that might have space, but they're usually full this time of month when benefits run out." Morgan turned without speaking and pushed back into the rain. She drove to a truck stop on the edge of town. In the bathroom, she locked herself in a stall and finally allowed the tears to come, mixing with rainwater already soaking her clothes. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a discarded manual on the counter beside a stack of paper towels. Container modification for offshore conditions. A technician's guide, dog-eared and water-stained, likely left behind by a trucker. Morgan picked it up without conscious thought, tucking it into her jacket. In her truck, engine running for warmth, Morgan opened the manual to a random page. Diagrams of weatherproofing techniques stared back at her. Cross-sectional illustrations showing proper sealing methods for joints and seams, material specifications for various climate conditions, alternative approaches for different budget constraints, solutions to the very problems destroying her makeshift home. As she closed the book, a realization crystallized in Morgan's mind with the clarity of perfect welds joining dissimilar metals. She had been approaching her situation fundamentally wrong. She'd been thinking of the container as temporary shelter until something better materialized. But what if it wasn't a stopgap? What if it was raw material waiting to be transformed? She possessed the one thing no amount of money could purchase: the technical knowledge to reshape metal, to join disparate pieces into functional wholes, to create structural integrity where none existed. 12 years of professional experience had equipped her with skills that transcended her current circumstances. What she lacked wasn't ability, it was resources and specific application knowledge. The manual in her hands bridged that gap. "I don't need charity," Morgan realized. "I need tools." The container stood dark and dripping in the vacant lot, water streaming from its corners like tears. Morgan parked as close as possible and ran through the rain, manual clutched against her chest. Inside, standing water covered nearly half the floor, her remaining possessions lay in sodden heaps, and the temperature had dropped to near freezing. Rather than despair, Morgan felt a strange calm settle over her. She'd seen flooded engine compartments in vessels that later crossed oceans. She'd repaired hull breaches that would have sunk lesser ships. This was simply another technical problem requiring systematic analysis and precision implementation. Morning broke with unexpected clarity, the storm having exhausted itself overnight. Morgan emerged from the truck to find the container glistening in early sunlight, water still dripping from its seams but less urgently now. She circled it slowly, seeing it through new eyes, not as shelter but as a project, not as a last resort but as a first step. The teenagers arrived as she was emptying water from the container using a plastic cup found in her truck. Their phones were already raised, ready to capture fresh humiliation. Morgan straightened, looked directly into their cameras for the first time, and spoke with the quiet authority that had once commanded respect on the fabrication floor. "You might want to document this properly if you're going to keep filming. What I'm building here will be worth recording correctly." Her certainty caught them off guard. They lowered their phones slightly, confusion replacing anticipation on their faces. Morgan returned to her task without further acknowledgement. After a few minutes, they drifted away in search of more immediately gratifying content. That day marked the beginning of transformation, not just of the container, but of Morgan herself. She walked to the recycling center 3 miles away, introduced herself to the manager, and negotiated permission to collect discarded building materials. She discovered a construction dumpster behind a renovation project downtown, waiting until workers left before salvaging insulation foam and partial sheets of drywall. She returned to the container with armloads of materials, making 3 trips on foot rather than waste precious fuel. The first task was stopping water infiltration. The manual provided clear guidance: seal every seam, reinforce door gaskets, create proper drainage channels around the container's base. Morgan lacked proper sealant, but found a discarded tube of roofing tar behind an apartment complex undergoing repairs. It wasn't ideal for permanent application, but it would serve until something better became available. She worked until darkness made continued progress impossible, then collapsed into her still damp sleeping bag, muscles aching from unaccustomed labor. That night, as rain returned with less intensity than before, she listened for drips inside the container. Still present, but fewer, progress measured in drops rather than streams. The next morning brought unexpected resistance. A notice had been taped to the container door overnight: illegal structure, vacate within 48 hours or face removal. No official letterhead, no signature, no contact information. Not from the city, which would have used official channels. Not from the lot owner, who had already accepted her money. A different kind of attack. That afternoon, as Morgan wedged insulation between the metal ribs of the container's interior walls, 2 men appeared at the edge of the lot. One filmed while the other narrated in an exaggerated documentary voice. Here we see Bridgeport's newest attraction: Container Lady in her natural habitat. Note the primitive nesting behavior, the collection of discarded materials. Truly a magnificent example of downward mobility in the urban ecosystem. Morgan continued working, back turned to their performance. The sound of their laughter carried across the lot, followed by the distinctive tone of a social media upload. Another video added to her unwanted collection. Another layer of humiliation served to an audience she would never see. But something had shifted inside her since finding the manual. Where shame had once lived, determination now burned with steady heat. Let them film, let them mock. They saw only the surface, the rust, the dents, the patches. They couldn't see what she was creating beneath it all, couldn't understand the structural integrity taking shape with each reclaimed piece. That evening, as Morgan sealed another section of the container's seams, a comment from one of the videos reached her through overheard conversation at the laundromat. "Say what you want, girls got grit." 5 words from an unknown observer who had seen past the spectacle to the person beneath. 5 words that somehow weighed more than all the mockery combined. Morgan carried those words back to the container, held them close as she stretched her remaining $531 across minimal food and maximum materials. Grit wasn't just stubbornness or endurance. Grit was persistence with purpose, continuation with direction. Grit meant proceeding when logic suggested surrender. As twilight settled over Bridgeport, Morgan sat on the edge of her newly constructed platform, container doors open to catch the last warmth of the day. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled her from contemplation. A figure appeared at the edge of the lot, not the teenagers with their cameras, but an older man in worn work clothes. He carried something in his arms, though shadows obscured the details. The man stopped several yards from the container, studying it with the appraising eye of someone who understood construction. When he spoke, his voice carried the roughness of a lifetime smoker. "Roof's your weak point. All the sealant in the world won't help if water pools up there. You need proper drainage and a membrane barrier." Not an accusation, an observation. Morgan nodded, acknowledging both the assessment and the professional knowledge behind it. The man stepped closer, into the pool of light spilling from Morgan's lantern. Now she could see what he carried: a roll of rubber roofing material, the kind used for flat commercial buildings. "Had this left over from a job last summer. Been sitting in my garage taking up space. Thought maybe you could use it." He set the roll at the edge of her step, careful not to encroach on her territory. Their eyes met briefly, no pity in his gaze, just the simple recognition of one skilled worker to another. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering darkness before Morgan could find words of thanks. She unrolled a section of the material, running her fingers over its weather-resistant surface. Professional grade, easily worth $300 new. Enough to cover the entire container roof with proper overlaps. the single most critical upgrade she hadn't been able to salvage or improvise. That night, as Morgan lay on her platform listening to rain drum against the container roof, her mind filled not with worry, but with plans. Tomorrow she would begin the roofing process, using techniques she'd learned during shipyard building repairs. The day after, she would focus on improving ventilation without compromising weatherproofing. Small, achievable steps toward a goal that grew clearer with each improvement. The container was no longer a symbol of how far she had fallen. It was becoming proof of how much she could build with nothing but determination and skills. Let them film. Let them mock. Let them underestimate what a woman with calloused hands and specialized knowledge could create from materials others had discarded. They had no idea what was taking shape inside the rusted walls they ridiculed. But they would. Eventually they would. The rubber roofing material required specific tools for proper installation: a heat gun for seam welding, a roller for adhesive application, sealant for edge protection. Morgan possessed none of these. The technical manual provided alternative methods using basic tools, but these compromises would reduce the roof's lifespan by approximately 40%. Dawn illuminated the problem as Morgan stood on the container roof, assessing the drainage patterns where yesterday's rain had pooled. Water always finds the path of least resistance, and on this flat surface, it had created miniature topographical maps of shallow depressions and channels. The corrugated metal amplified the issue, each ridge becoming a potential water trap once rust began compromising the protective paint. She climbed down carefully, muscles protesting from yesterday's exertions. The recycling center opened at 7, leaving her 90 minutes to develop a materials list based on both necessity and potential availability. She reviewed the roof membrane specifications in the manual, adhesive application temperature requirements, substrate preparation guidelines, overlap minimums for waterproof integrity. The weather forecast called for clear skies over the next 48 hours, a critical window for external repairs. Morgan set the roofing material aside temporarily. Without proper tools, attempting installation now would waste a valuable resource. Better to focus on immediately achievable improvements while developing a strategy for the more complex modifications. Inside the container, the raised sleeping platform had dramatically improved overnight comfort, but the walls remained a significant heat transfer problem. Metal's high thermal conductivity meant that the thin container shell effectively connected interior and exterior temperatures with minimal resistance. Every square foot of uninsulated wall surface extracted body heat during the night and absorbed solar radiation during the day, creating extremes at both ends of the comfort spectrum. The technical solution was straightforward: create a thermal break between the metal shell and the interior space. The implementation, however, required materials and tools Morgan couldn't easily access. The manual detailed ideal insulation methods: spray foam applied directly to the container walls, followed by metal stud framing and interior wall panels, a system requiring approximately $2,000 in materials alone. Morgan sketched alternative approaches in a small notebook salvaged from her truck's glove compartment. The drawings showed cross-sections of wall assemblies using materials she might reasonably obtain through scavenging: rigid foam insulation from construction dumpsters, wooden pallets disassembled for framing, cardboard and newspaper as gap fillers where more effective insulation wasn't available. The recycling center's manager greeted Morgan with guarded acknowledgement when she arrived at opening time. Their previous arrangement had been clear. She could collect materials from the public discard area, but nothing from the sorted recyclables or items earmarked for resale. Today, she had a proposal to expand that arrangement. Look, I've got skills. I can fix things: mechanical, structural, electrical. Trade you labor for more access to materials. 3 hours of my time for whatever building supplies come through that you'd normally throw away. The manager, a practical woman with salt and pepper hair twisted into a severe bun, assessed Morgan with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating both materials and people for hidden value. We've got 3 broken heaters in the office that maintenance keeps promising to look at. Fix those, and you can have first pick of the construction materials for a month. But nothing that's slated for sale. Those pay my electric bill. The agreement struck, Morgan followed the manager to a small office where 3 space heaters sat in various states of disrepair. The first had a broken power switch, simple replacement. The second suffered from a damaged heating element that required rewiring. The third had multiple issues: faulty thermostat, loose wiring, and a cracked housing that created potential fire hazards. Morgan worked systematically, using the limited tools available in the center's maintenance kit. The repairs took just under 2 hours, each heater tested thoroughly before moving to the next. When all three functioned properly, the manager led her to a storage area where construction materials awaited sorting, a treasure trove of possibilities. The inventory included partial sheets of rigid foam insulation, water-damaged but structurally sound plywood, half-used rolls of house wrap, assorted lumber cutoffs, and buckets containing mismatched hardware. Morgan selected items with surgical precision, prioritizing materials for wall insulation and structural improvements. The manager, impressed by both the repairs and Morgan's disciplined selection process, added a roll of duct tape and a caulking gun with 3 partial tubes of sealant. Those were headed for the dumpster anyway. Sealant's probably half-hardened, but it's better than nothing. Morgan transported the materials using a borrowed handcart, making 3 trips between the recycling center and her container. The physical labor pulling the heavily loaded cart across uneven sidewalks and broken asphalt highlighted how quickly her once powerful upper body strength had deteriorated during months of inadequate nutrition and inconsistent physical demands. By early afternoon, she had accumulated enough materials to begin the critical task of wall insulation. The process required methodical execution. Measure each section of the container's corrugated interior, cut rigid foam to fit precisely between the metal ribs, secure with salvaged adhesive or mechanical fasteners where possible, seal edges with tape to prevent air infiltration and moisture migration. The first wall section, approximately 30 square feet of the north-facing side, took nearly 3 hours to complete. Morgan worked without proper tools, using a kitchen knife instead of a utility blade for cutting insulation, a piece of scrap wood instead of a proper straight edge for marking cut lines, and a rock wrapped in cloth instead of a rubber mallet for securing tight-fitting pieces. The immediate result was visually unimpressive: a patchwork of different colored foam boards creating an uneven surface that still revealed the metal corrugation pattern beneath. But the thermal difference was immediately measurable. When Morgan placed her palm against the insulated section, the metal's characteristic cold no longer bled through. She created the critical thermal break between exterior and interior environments. As daylight began to fade, Morgan assessed her progress. 1/6 of the wall area properly insulated, leaving approximately 160 square feet still requiring treatment. At the current rate, completing the wall insulation alone would require several more days of focused work. Meanwhile, the roof remained vulnerable, ventilation non-existent, and her food supplies dwindling toward critical levels. The necessary prioritization calculations occupied her thoughts as she walked toward the convenience store, hoping to stretch her remaining cash for maximum caloric efficiency. The store owner nodded toward the coffee pot, the small kindness now an established ritual. Morgan accepted gratefully, adding the precise amount of sugar needed to boost the beverage's energy content without wasting resources. When you're done with that container project, my back room needs shelving. Nothing fancy, just sturdy enough to hold inventory. Pays in cash or store credit, your choice. The first job offer that didn't involve basic manual labor since her layoff. Morgan calculated quickly. Shelving construction would require perhaps 8 hours of work if using salvaged materials. At her previous hourly rate, that would equal approximately $280. The store owner would likely offer significantly less, but even $100 would extend her financial runway considerably. I'll take the job. Got a list of what you need? Dimensions, weight capacity, adjustability? The owner seemed surprised by the professional approach, having expected perhaps simple acceptance rather than technical clarification. He disappeared into the back room, returning with a sketch on the back of a receipt showing rough measurements and placement. Morgan reviewed it critically, noting structural issues and inefficient use of vertical space. You've got an uneven floor here, and these dimensions waste about 30% of your storage volume. Let me redesign this. Same materials, better capacity, proper weight distribution. Morgan returned to the container with both a professional opportunity and 3-day-old bagels the owner had added to her purchase without comment. The small victory Recognition of her technical skills rather than her circumstances provided an emotional boost that transcended the modest financial implications. That night, temperature dropped to 17 degrees F outside the container. Inside, the partially insulated space maintained 31 degrees F, still below freezing, but a crucial 14-degree improvement that moved conditions from immediately life-threatening to merely uncomfortable. Morgan slept in cycles of 3 hours, waking to perform basic calisthenics that generated enough body heat to offset the cold before returning to sleep. Morning brought unexpected complications. The borrowed handcart from the recycling center needed returning, limiting Morgan's material gathering capabilities for the day. The container's door hinges, subjected to multiple daily temperature cycles and recent precipitation, had developed concerning corrosion that threatened proper closure, a potentially catastrophic vulnerability if left unaddressed. Morgan prioritized the door repair, recognizing that without secure closure, all other improvements became irrelevant. The hinge mechanism required disassembly, cleaning, lubrication, and reinstallation. A straightforward process complicated by lack of proper tools and lubricants. The corner store provided an interim solution. Cooking oil, not ideal for metal lubrication, but sufficient as a temporary measure until proper materials could be obtained. Morgan carefully removed each hinge pin, cleaned the accumulated corrosion using a wire brush fashioned from scrap material, applied the oil sparingly to critical friction points, and reassembled the components with mechanical precision. At the recycling center, Morgan returned the handcart and fulfilled the second part of her labor agreement, sorting a newly arrived truckload of construction debris into recoverable materials and actual waste. The physically demanding work provided valuable intelligence about material availability patterns. Certain construction sites consistently discarded specific materials. One luxury condominium project routinely disposed of high-quality lumber with minor cosmetic flaws. A commercial renovation generated surplus insulation and electrical components. Residential remodels yielded appliance parts and plumbing fixtures. This information allowed Morgan to develop a more strategic approach to resource acquisition. Rather than random scavenging, she could target specific locations based on project types and construction phases, dramatically improving her material collection efficiency. The recycling center manager, observing Morgan's systematic approach to sorting, offered an additional arrangement. We get specialized metals sometimes, aluminum, copper, even occasional stainless steel. Stuff I can't sell easily because it's odd shapes or sizes. You know what's quality and what's junk. Sort the good from the bad, keep half of what's worth saving. For someone with Morgan's metallurgical knowledge, this represented a significant opportunity. High-quality metals could be repurposed for critical container modifications or potentially sold to specialized buyers if cash became the priority. She accepted immediately, scheduling 2 hours every other day for metal sorting. That afternoon, Morgan focused on ventilation issues. The container, designed for cargo rather than habitation, provided minimal air exchange through small vents near the ceiling. These vents, while preventing cargo condensation during ocean transport, were wholly inadequate for human occupancy and positioned poorly for protection against precipitation. The technical manual detailed optimal ventilation configurations, intake vents placed low on the south-facing wall to capture warmer air, exhaust vents positioned high on the north wall to create natural convection currents, both protected by weatherproof covers and insect screens. Implementation would require cutting through the container's metal shell, a major structural modification demanding proper tools and materials Morgan didn't possess. The temporary alternative was controlled door positioning, opening the doors precisely 2 inches during daylight hours with a physical stop preventing further movement. This created minimal ventilation while maintaining reasonable security, though at a significant cost to thermal efficiency. Morgan constructed the doorstop from salvaged lumber, cutting a notch pattern that allowed for adjustable opening widths depending on weather conditions. Walking toward the convenience store to discuss the shelving project in greater detail, Morgan encountered one of her former co-workers from Gulf Coast Marine Repairs. Thompson, a quality control inspector who had worked closely with Morgan on certification projects, froze momentarily upon recognition, discomfort evident in his rigid posture. Heard you were staying in some kind of shipping container setup. Thought people were exaggerating. The company's got a few new contracts coming in. Nothing permanent, but they're bringing people back on temporary status. Might be worth checking in. The information triggered complex calculations. Temporary work would provide essential income, but reduce time available for container improvements during critical weather conditions. The company that had discarded her specialized skills now offered conditional reemployment at reduced compensation. Practical necessity battled against professional dignity. Thanks for the information. I'll consider it. The encounter catalyzed an uncomfortable realization. Morgan's professional identity and financial survival had diverged into separate tracks requiring different optimization strategies. The master welder with specialized certifications needed to protect her professional value by accepting only appropriate compensation for her expertise. The woman living in a shipping container needed any income available regardless of professional implications. At the convenience store, the owner had prepared more detailed specifications for the shelving project, including inventory weight estimates and access requirements. Morgan reviewed the information, making technical adjustments that would improve functionality while reducing material requirements. I can build this with mostly salvaged materials, but I'll need specific hardware for proper load-bearing connections. Estimate 80 new materials plus labor. Total project costs, 170 including design modifications that'll increase your storage capacity by about 30% over the original plan. The owner considered the proposal with the careful deliberation of someone accustomed to calculating profit margins on every business decision. 150 total, including materials, half in cash, half in store credit, and I need it done within 5 days. Morgan accepted the terms immediately. The arrangement provided 70 kilos in critical cash flow plus 70 in store credit for necessities, an essential financial lifeline. The 5-day timeline was aggressive but achievable if she dedicated approximately 4 hours daily to the project, leaving adequate time for continued container improvements. That evening, as darkness fell over Bridgeport, Morgan inventoried her container's evolving status. 1/5 of the wall area now properly insulated, door functionality temporarily restored, ventilation marginally improved through controlled opening protocols, sleeping platform providing critical floor separation. The roof remained the most significant vulnerability, with the rubber membrane material still awaiting proper installation tools. Progress existed in measurable increments, but the container remained fundamentally unsuitable for long-term habitation without substantial additional improvements. The technical challenges were soluble given appropriate resources. The emotional challenges, adapting to public scrutiny, maintaining professional identity amid personal crisis, preserving dignity in circumstances designed to strip it away, presented more complex problems without clear technical solutions. Morgan consulted the container modification manual again, focusing on the section detailing budget alternatives for essential systems. The water collection options particularly caught her attention. Simple gutter systems feeding into filtration barrels could provide non-potable water for cleaning and limited hygiene purposes. Implementing even this basic system would reduce her dependence on public facilities and the associated exposure to community judgment. Morning brought unexpected developments. A small cardboard box sat outside the container door, unmarked except for a piece of duct tape securing the flaps. Inside, Morgan found basic construction tools, a utility knife with replacement blades, a hammer with rubber grip, screwdrivers in 3 sizes, and a battery-powered drill with 2 spare batteries but no charger. No note, no identification. Another anonymous contribution from someone observing her efforts. The tools dramatically accelerated Morgan's work capacity. The utility knife cut insulation cleanly, creating tight-fitting pieces that maximize thermal efficiency. The drill secured materials with proper mechanical fasteners rather than makeshift connections. The basic toolkit represented a quantum leap in capability, transforming hours of awkward labor into minutes of precise execution. By mid-morning, Morgan had doubled her previous day's insulation progress, covering an additional 16 square feet of wall area with significantly improved installation quality. The anonymous tools enabled a construction standard approaching professional results rather than desperate improvisation. At the convenience store, the owner had cleared the back room for the shelving project and acquired some of the necessary hardware. Morgan took precise measurements, noting structural attachment points and load distribution requirements. The space, approximately 12 feet by 14 feet, needed 3 shelving units of varying depths to accommodate different inventory types. Morgan designed the system to utilize standard lumber dimensions, minimizing cuts and material waste. The structural calculations incorporated safety factors appropriate for commercial use rather than residential standards, ensuring the shelving would support stated loads without risk of failure. The professional approach, applying advanced technical knowledge to a basic construction task, felt simultaneously rewarding and demeaning. The container project and shelving construction now operated as parallel tracks in Morgan's daily schedule. Mornings dedicated to container improvements, while natural light provided optimal working conditions. Afternoons spent on the shelving project, utilizing the store's electricity for power tools and interior lighting. Evenings reserved for planning, material preparation, and essential container maintenance. This rhythm established a crucial sense of normalcy, a structured schedule, purposeful activity, measured progress toward defined objectives. The psychological benefits transcended the practical improvements, creating a framework of order within circumstances defined by disorder. 3 days into this new routine, as Morgan worked on the shelving project, a city vehicle parked outside the convenience store. The code enforcement officer who emerged carried a clipboard and the distinctive air of bureaucratic authority. He entered the store briefly, then exited and walked purposefully toward Morgan's container. Morgan set aside her tools and followed, maintaining a distance that allowed observation without direct confrontation. The officer circled the container, taking photographs and making notes. He attempted to open the locked doors, then attached an official notice to the exterior before returning to his vehicle and departing. The notice, printed on city letterhead with multiple citation codes highlighted in yellow, delivered an unambiguous message. Unauthorized dwelling structure, violation of Municipal Code 423.7. Remedy within 30 days or face removal and penalties. This represented a categorical threat different from the anonymous note previously left on her door. Official city involvement escalated the situation from neighborhood harassment to legal jeopardy. The 30-day compliance window provided temporary relief but established a definitive deadline for resolution. Morgan photographed the notice with her phone before removing it from the container door. The specific code citation provided a research starting point. Understanding exactly which regulations she violated would determine potential compliance pathways. The public library's computer access would allow a review of municipal codes and identification of minimum requirements for legal occupancy. The code enforcement complication added new urgency to the shelving project's completion. The store owner might withdraw the opportunity if he perceived potential legal entanglements from association with Morgan's situation. Accelerating the construction timeline became the immediate priority, even at the cost of container improvements. Morgan worked through the afternoon without breaks, completing the structural framework for all 3 shelving units in a single session. The owner, impressed by both the speed and quality of the work, brought her a sandwich from the deli section without comment, a small kindness that prevented interruption while addressing her increasingly visible hunger. The city's zoning and code enforcement database, accessed through the public library's computer system that evening, revealed the specific nature of the violation. Municipal Code 423.7 prohibited temporary structures used for human habitation without approved sanitation facilities, electrical connections meeting current code requirements, and fire safety provisions, including smoke detection and emergency egress. The regulation contained a critical exception clause. Structures classified as transitional emergency housing may receive conditional approval through variance application process if meeting minimum safety standards and connected to approved waste management systems. This language provided a potential compliance pathway, though one fraught with bureaucratic obstacles and financial requirements far beyond Morgan's current resources. The variance application alone cost $275, requiring supporting documentation including architectural drawings, electrical plans, and waste management specifications. Morgan's professional training included reading technical documents for actionable intelligence rather than surface content. The code's specific wording, structures classified as transitional emergency housing, indicated an existing regulatory framework for non-traditional dwellings. This suggested both established precedent and defined compliance pathways, potentially including existing variance templates or expedited processes for certain situations. The library's closing announcement interrupted her research before she could locate specific variance application procedures. Morgan noted the critical search terms for continued investigation during her next access opportunity, then walked toward her container in the deepening twilight. The city's involvement created multidimensional complications. Direct defiance of the order would eventually result in forced removal and potential property seizure. Complete compliance would require financial resources exceeding $2,000 for permits, inspections, and required modifications. Abandoning the container would sacrifice the $800 investment and return Morgan to transient status with winter conditions still prevailing. That night, as temperatures again dropped below 20 degrees, Morgan reviewed her situation with ruthless objectivity. Financial resources: $382.31 remaining from previous funds, $75 forthcoming upon shelving, project completion, $7 in store credit. Material assets: partially modified container, salvaged construction materials, professional tools and equipment. Timeline pressures: 30-day compliance window for code violations, approximately 45 days until seasonal temperature moderation, 5 days until shelving project deadline. The practical assessment illuminated the fundamental challenge. Each improvement track, container habitability, financial stability, legal compliance, required resources currently allocated to the other tracks. Optimizing any single variable necessitated sacrificing progress on others. Morning brought clarity through necessity. The shelving project represented the only immediate income source and required completion regardless of other considerations. Morgan dedicated the full day to final construction, installing shelving supports, securing cross-bracing for lateral stability, and finishing all surfaces to commercial standards. The owner inspected the completed work with increasingly surprised appreciation as he tested each shelf, examined the construction details, and evaluated the overall quality. "This is professional work. Way better than what I expected. You really know what you're doing with this stuff." He paid the agreed amount without hesitation, adding a small bag of groceries. Overstocked items we'd just write off anyway. That included canned goods, energy bars, and vacuum-sealed jerky with distant expiration dates. The additional food represented approximately 3 days of nutritional requirements, a critical extension to Morgan's resource timeline. With the shelving project completed and payments secured, Morgan returned her focus to the container's most pressing vulnerabilities. The roof remained the highest priority, with continued precipitation in the weather forecast threatening to undermine internal improvements through water infiltration. The rubber membrane material required specific installation parameters that Morgan couldn't currently meet. The technical manual suggested alternative approaches using more readily available materials. Overlapping layers of heavy plastic sheeting, secured with construction adhesive, asphalt roofing material applied with cold process adhesive, or even heavy-duty tarps properly sloped for drainage and securely fastened to prevent wind infiltration. Morgan opted for a hybrid approach based on available materials. The recycling center's metal sorting arrangement had yielded several sheets of aluminum flashing, thin, flexible metal typically used for weatherproofing roof penetrations and wall transitions. When properly overlapped and sealed, this material could create an effective temporary roof barrier while she acquired proper tools for the permanent membrane installation. The flashing installation required careful measurement, cutting with the newly acquired utility knife, and secure attachment using salvaged screws. Morgan created a slight drainage slope by installing thin wooden strips running the length of the container, establishing controlled water flow patterns that directed precipitation toward the corners rather than allowing it to pool randomly. Each aluminum sheet overlapped the adjacent piece by 3 inches, with construction adhesive creating a watertight seal between layers. The container's edge received special attention, with the flashing bent downward to create a primitive drip edge that prevented water from migrating underneath the protective layer. The improvised roofing solution took 7 hours of continuous labor, requiring Morgan to work through her usual meal break to complete the installation before incoming weather arrived. The physical toll, Hours spent kneeling on the hard metal surface, arms extended overhead for precise positioning, continuous concentration on safety while working at height, manifested as deep muscular fatigue and compromised coordination by late afternoon. From ground level, the completed roof modification appeared professionally executed, the aluminum surface reflecting late afternoon sunlight in a way that transformed the container's appearance from abandoned cargo unit to intentional structure. The aesthetics meant nothing compared to the functional improvement, but the visual transformation seemed to reduce curious stares from passers-by. That evening, rain arrived as predicted, providing immediate testing of the roof modifications. Morgan remained inside the container throughout the precipitation, monitoring for leaks with hypervigilant attention. The aluminum flashing performed remarkably well, reducing previous widespread leakage to 3 specific points where installation errors or material limitations created vulnerabilities. Morgan marked each leak location with blue painter's tape salvaged from a construction dumpster, creating a precise repair map for addressing remaining deficiencies. The overall success rate, approximately 90% reduction in water infiltration, represented a critical victory in the container's transformation from survival shelter to sustainable dwelling. The following morning, after addressing the identified roof vulnerabilities with additional sealant, Morgan returned to the library for continued research on code compliance options. The municipal database revealed a specific variance application process for alternative dwelling structures, including detailed requirements for minimum standards. 1. Structural integrity, certification by licensed engineer or certified inspector. 2. Electrical systems meeting basic safety requirements, GFCI protection, proper grounding, appropriate wire gauge. 3. Sanitation provisions including gray water management and approved waste disposal, heating/cooling systems with appropriate ventilation and carbon monoxide detection. Fire safety features including smoke detection, fire extinguisher, and unobstructed emergency exit. The variance application process included a critical provision. Applicants demonstrating financial hardship may request fee waiver and technical assistance through the Community Development Department. This language provided a potential pathway for compliance without the prohibitive $275 application fee, though it introduced additional bureaucratic complexity. The Community Development Department occupied the eastern wing of Bridgeport's municipal building, its entrance distinguished by faded posters promoting various assistance programs. Morgan approached the service counter with the professional demeanor that had once characterized her interactions with certification authorities and regulatory inspectors. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses suspended from a beaded chain, regarded Morgan with the particular scrutiny of someone accustomed to evaluating assistance eligibility based on appearance. I'm seeking information about the alternative dwelling structure variance application process, specifically the hardship provision for fee waivers and technical assistance. The clerk's expression shifted from generic bureaucratic disinterest to more focused assessment. That program has specific qualification requirements: income verification, demonstration of extenuating circumstances, and proof of good faith efforts towards standard compliance. The waiting period for application review is currently 11 weeks due to departmental staffing limitations. 11 weeks exceeded both the code enforcement compliance window and Morgan's financial survival horizon. The bureaucratic timeline rendered the theoretical assistance effectively unavailable regardless of qualification status. Is there an expedited process for situations where code enforcement has already issued compliance orders with specific deadlines? The clerk consulted her computer, scrolling through what appeared to be a procedural manual with highlighted sections. Expedited processing requires director approval based on documented health and safety risks or imminent displacement circumstances. The expedited review still requires approximately 4 to 6 weeks, depending on current department workload. The information confirmed Morgan's growing suspicion. The theoretical compliance pathway existed on paper, but remained practically inaccessible due to administrative friction and resource limitations. The system provided the appearance of accommodation while effectively preventing actual utilization. As Morgan left the municipal building, strategic reality crystallized with cold clarity. The code compliance track, while theoretically viable, would not resolve within the 30-day enforcement window. The container modifications, while improving habitability, would not achieve legal compliance standards without resources currently unavailable. The financial situation, while temporarily stabilized through the shelving project, remained insufficient for systematic resolution of either challenge. The mathematical conclusion was inescapable. Current trajectories led to forced container abandonment at the enforcement deadline unless a significant variable changed. That recognition shifted Morgan's strategic approach from parallel improvement tracks to focused resource acquisition. The container modifications would continue, but prioritized strictly by salvage value and portability rather than long-term habitability. This strategic pivot produced immediate tactical changes. Insulation efforts focused on sections installed with mechanical fasteners that could be removed and reused if relocation became necessary. The aluminum roof flashing, attached with accessible screws rather than permanent adhesives, maintained future reclamation potential. Interior improvements utilized connection methods that facilitated rapid disassembly if required. The convenience store owner, noting Morgan's professional execution of the shelving project, mentioned her skills to a regular customer who operated a small engine repair shop 3 blocks away. Guy says he's looking for someone who knows their way around mechanical stuff. Not full-time, just helping clear the backlog. Said to send you by if you're interested. The repair shop occupied a narrow storefront wedged between a check-cashing operation and a vacant former bakery. The interior smelled of two-stroke oil, metal shavings, and the particular dust produced by mechanical disassembly. Lawn equipment, chainsaws, pressure washers, and assorted power tools in various states of repair filled wooden workbenches along both walls. The owner, a man in his 60s with mechanical knowledge, evident in his methodical movements, assessed Morgan with professional rather than personal judgment. Got 37 repairs in backlog, most just need basic maintenance. Fuel system cleaning, carburetor rebuilds, ignition timing. Pay is 14 per hour, or flat rate per repair, whichever works out higher. No benefits, no paperwork. Cash at the end of each day. The arrangement presented both opportunity and compromise. The hourly rate represented less than half Morgan's previous professional compensation, but offered immediate cash flow without administrative delays or qualification requirements. The work utilized her mechanical knowledge without directly employing her specialized welding credentials, creating income without professional identity dilution. I'll take the flat rate option. Let me see the repair backlog list, and I can estimate completion timeframes. The owner handed over a clipboard with handwritten work orders, each containing basic information about equipment type, reported issues, and customer contact information. Morgan reviewed the list systematically, mentally cataloging the repairs by complexity, required parts, and estimated labor hours. I can complete approximately 6 repairs daily depending on parts availability and specific issue complexity. Prioritizing by completion potential rather than ticket order would optimize workflow efficiency. The owner's expression revealed surprise at the professional assessment rather than simple acceptance of offered work. You actually know what you're talking about. Most people who come through that door looking for cash work can barely identify a spark plug. Start tomorrow, 8 a.m. I'll have the first batch ready. The repair shop opportunity created crucial financial stability, potentially generating $280 to $350 weekly, depending on repair complexity and parts availability. This income level, while insufficient for conventional housing, would extend Morgan's container timeline indefinitely and potentially fund critical compliance modifications if the code enforcement deadline could be extended. That evening, armed with marginally improved financial projections, Morgan reconsidered the code compliance challenge from multiple angles. The formal variance process remained impractical within the 30-day window, but alternative approaches might create time extensions or enforcement flexibility. The enforcement notice specifically cited unauthorized dwelling structure as the violation category. If the container could be reclassified as storage with incidental occupancy rather than primary dwelling, different regulatory standards might apply. This would require demonstrating alternative sleeping arrangements while maintaining the container as a daytime workshop and storage facility. The classification strategy required careful implementation. Morgan would need to establish documented evidence of alternative sleeping arrangements, perhaps officially renting a room that she could demonstrate as her legal address, while continuing to utilize the container as her actual shelter. The financial implications were significant, but potentially manageable with the repair shop income supplementing existing resources. The repair shop position began the following morning, with Morgan arriving 15 minutes early to familiarize herself with the workspace organization and tool inventory. The owner had prepared 6 units for service, 4 lawnmowers with standard maintenance requirements, and 2 chainsaws with more complex fuel system issues. Morgan approached the repairs systematically, beginning with basic diagnostic assessment of each unit before disassembly. The process felt familiar despite equipment differences from her shipyard experience. Mechanical systems operated on consistent principles regardless of specific application. Internal combustion fundamentals remained unchanged, whether powering a marine generator or a residential lawnmower. The first repair, a carburetor rebuild on a Briggs & Stratton engine, proceeded with methodical precision. Morgan disassembled the component completely, cleaning each part with appropriate solvents, inspecting for wear patterns indicating underlying issues, then reassembling with new gaskets and properly adjusted fuel/air mixture settings. The owner observed portions of the process without comment, his expression shifting from initial skepticism to professional recognition. When Morgan completed the third repair before lunch break, diagnosing and resolving an ignition timing issue that had apparently confused previous repair attempts, he nodded with quiet acknowledgement. You've got actual training, not just shade tree mechanic stuff. Where'd you learn systematic troubleshooting like that? Morgan continued reassembling the ignition module while responding, hands maintaining their rhythmic efficiency regardless of conversation. 12 years at Gulf Coast Marine Repairs. Started in small engine room maintaining emergency generators and auxiliary power units. Moved to welding division after certification. But the diagnostic process is basically the same regardless of system type. Identify most likely failure points. Test methodically. Resolve root causes rather than symptoms. The owner processed this information with the particular expression of someone recalculating an initial assessment based on new data. Marine repair pays a hell of a lot better than this place. What are you doing fixing lawnmowers? The question probed directly into the contradiction Morgan had been navigating, the disconnection between professional capability and current circumstances. The automatic defensive response formed and dissolved unspoken as she recognized the question contained professional curiosity rather than personal judgment. Economic contraction, gender-selective rehiring practices, medical debt, the usual American working-class disaster sequence. This is temporary while I rebuild. The short explanation, delivered without emotional inflection while continuing the repair process, established professional common ground rather than personal disclosure. The owner nodded with the particular understanding of someone familiar with economic vulnerability despite technical capability. I've got connections at Peterson's Metal Fabrication over in Westport. They're always looking for people who actually know what they're doing. Pays better than here, though still probably below your qualification level. Want me to make a call? The unexpected networking opportunity represented the first potential pathway back toward Morgan's professional field since her layoff. Peterson's maintained a reputation for quality industrial work, primarily in commercial applications rather than marine specialization, but utilized similar skill sets and technical standards. I'd appreciate that. My certifications are current for another 7 months, including titanium and high-pressure applications. By day's end, Morgan had completed 7 repairs, exceeding both her estimate and the shop's usual productivity standards. The owner paid the agreed amount in cash, $175 for the day's work, and confirmed he'd contacted Peterson's about potential opportunities. The income, while modest by her previous standards, represented nearly half her remaining container investment recovered in a single workday. That night, Morgan returned to the container with renewed strategic focus. The income from repair work created financial stability that enabled longer-term planning rather than day-to-day survival calculations. The potential fabrication opportunity at Peterson's might provide professional re-entry at compensation levels that would support conventional housing, eliminating the code compliance issue entirely. The container's interior had transformed significantly through cumulative improvements. Approximately 60% of the wall area now featured proper insulation, dramatically improving thermal performance. The roof modifications had eliminated most water infiltration. The raised sleeping platform, expanded with additional salvaged materials, now included rudimentary storage space underneath for more efficient organization. Morgan added a critical new element to the container's evolution, a small workbench constructed from salvaged materials positioned to capitalize on natural light from the partially open doors during daylight hours. This dedicated workspace would support minor repair projects she could complete during evening hours after the shop closed, potentially creating additional income through independent work. The workbench represented more than functional expansion. It symbolized the transition from passive survival to active rebuilding, from someone who needed shelter to someone who created value. The psychological shift proved as significant as the physical modification, establishing forward momentum rather than defensive persistence. A knock at the container door interrupted Morgan's workbench construction. She opened it cautiously, habitually wary of unexpected visitors after weeks of community scrutiny. The code enforcement officer from the previous week stood outside, clipboard in hand, an official expression carefully neutral. "I'm conducting follow-up on the violation notice from last week. Wanted to see if you've made progress toward compliance or have questions about the requirements." The direct engagement represented both risk and opportunity. Morgan assessed the officer's demeanor, professional rather than punitive, asking about progress rather than demanding immediate compliance. This suggested potential flexibility if approached correctly. "I've been researching the variance application process for alternative structures. The 30-day timeline is challenging given the application backlog at community development, but I'm implementing improvements to address the core safety concerns while the paperwork processes. Would you like to see what's been completed so far?" The officer hesitated briefly, then nodded. Morgan guided him through a carefully curated tour of the container modifications, highlighting safety improvements rather than comfort enhancements. She explained the roof drainage system's design principles, the ventilation improvements, air exchange calculations, and the electrical plans that would bring systems to code compliance once implemented. The technical presentation, delivered with professional confidence rather than defensive justification, visibly shifted the officer's perspective. His inspection notes focused on completed improvements rather than remaining deficiencies, and his questions sought clarification rather than confrontation. "You clearly understand the safety principles behind the code requirements, which is more than I can say for most violation cases I handle. I can extend the compliance window to 60 days based on demonstrated good faith efforts toward remediation. That should allow time for the variance application to process." The extension represented a crucial strategic victory, doubling the available timeline for achieving either code compliance or alternative housing arrangements. Morgan acknowledged the accommodation with professional appreciation rather than personal relief, maintaining the interaction's technical rather than emotional context. That night, as temperatures again dropped below freezing, Morgan reviewed her evolving situation with cautious optimism. Financial trajectory: positive with stable income established and professional reconnection potentially imminent. Container habitability: improving steadily with critical vulnerabilities addressed and systematic enhancements continuing. Legal compliance: tentative pathway established through enforcement extension and documented improvement progress. The container, once a desperate measure against imminent homelessness, had evolved into a platform for rebuilding both physical shelter and professional identity. The metal box that had attracted community ridicule now represented visible evidence of technical capability and systematic problem solving, the physical manifestation of refusing to be defined by circumstance rather than capability. As Morgan prepared for sleep on the improved platform, the container's metal walls creaked slightly with temperature contraction. The sound no longer represented vulnerability to environmental exposure, but rather the building's natural response to conditions she now understood and had begun to control. The technical knowledge that had defined her professional identity now transformed her personal circumstances, creating order from chaos through systematic application of principles rather than desperate improvisation. When someone is drowning, survival isn't measured in miles swum toward shore, but in seconds of continued breathing. When someone is rebuilding, progress isn't measured against conventional standards, but against the distance traveled from the starting point. The container remained rudimentary shelter by normal housing standards, but compared to sleeping in a truck during February in Connecticut, it represented remarkable progress constructed from determination and technical knowledge rather than financial resources. Tomorrow would bring another day of repair work, container improvements, and continued strategic evolution. The rebuilding process had acquired momentum, each improvement enabling the next in accelerating sequence. The fundamental equation had shifted from survival calculation to growth trajectory, from how long resources would last to how quickly capabilities could expand. The metal walls that had once represented constraint now defined the space where possibility germinated, protected from external judgment and nurtured by technical capability. The container was becoming not just shelter, but workshop, not just protection from elements, but platform for reconstruction. The transformation remained incomplete, vulnerable to disruption, and far below conventional standards. But its trajectory now pointed definitively upward rather than simply forward. The connection with Peterson's metal fabrication manifested more quickly than Morgan had anticipated. The repair shop owner's referral had apparently carried significant weight, as evidenced by the Wednesday morning phone call from their human resources department requesting an immediate interview. The timing created logistical complications. The shop had scheduled a full day of repairs, and Morgan's container improvements remained in critical developmental stages. But the opportunity's strategic importance outweighed all competing priorities. Morgan arrived at Peterson's 30 minutes early, having borrowed the repair shop owner's pressure washer to clean her only presentable work clothes. The facility occupied a sprawling industrial complex on Westport's eastern edge, its weathered exterior belying the precision work conducted within. Loading docks accommodated materials deliveries, while a separate customer entrance featured modest professional signage and a small, well-maintained reception area. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with the particular efficiency of someone who had occupied her position for decades, guided Morgan through a warren of administrative offices toward the fabrication floor. The transition from carpet to concrete demarcated the boundary between management and production domains, a division Morgan had navigated throughout her career with careful attention to the cultural differences between these organizational territories. The production manager who greeted her, Bill Harrington, silver-haired with the calloused hands of someone who had risen through technical ranks rather than educational credentials, dispensed with traditional interview protocols in favor of practical assessment. No resume review, no behavioral questions about greatest weaknesses or conflict resolution approaches. Instead, he led Morgan directly to a testing station equipped with specialized welding equipment and materials. We've got 8 certifications listed on your application. Let's start with the basics and work up to the specialized stuff. Standard carbon steel butt joint, then T-joint in aluminum. If those look good, we'll move to the pressure vessel certification test. Take whatever time you need for proper setup. Morgan approached the testing sequence methodically, mentally retrieving procedural protocols she hadn't actively used in months, but which remained encoded in muscle memory and technical knowledge. The standard test presented minimal challenge: properly executed welds with textbook penetration, uniform beading, and zero porosity. The aluminum joints required more careful attention after her extended absence from professional equipment, but the results remained well within certification parameters. The pressure vessel test represented the true evaluation: welding components designed to contain gases or liquids under significant pressure, where failure could result in catastrophic consequences. Morgan selected appropriate filler materials, adjusted gas mixtures with precision, and executed the complex joint with the focused concentration that had once defined her professional reputation. The completed assembly exhibited the hallmark characteristics of expert execution: consistent penetration throughout the joint profile, proper fusion between base and filler metals, and uniform appearance indicating steady hand movement and temperature control. Harrington examined each test piece with increasing interest, applying both visual inspection and non-destructive testing protocols to evaluate internal weld quality. His expression remained professionally neutral, but the thorough examination process itself communicated recognition of technical competence. After completing the final inspection, he nodded once, The particular acknowledgement skilled tradespeople exchange when technical excellence transcends verbal affirmation. When's the earliest you could start? We're running 2 shifts, your choice. Starting rate is 28.50 for certified pressure vessel work, plus differential for specialized materials. Health insurance after 60 days, retirement match at 6 months. No guarantees on overtime, but we're running behind on 3 government contracts, so it's available if you want it. The offer represented approximately 60% of Morgan's previous compensation at Gulf Coast, substantially below her professional market value, but significantly above any alternative currently available. The immediate start date would require terminating her arrangement with the repair shop, potentially damaging a valuable relationship. The benefits timeline meant 2 months of continued medical vulnerability, during which any health emergency would compound her existing financial crisis. Despite these considerations, the position offered critical strategic advantages: regular income at sustainable levels, professional re-entry into industrial fabrication, legitimate employment documentation for housing applications, and potential advancement opportunities as her technical capabilities became evident. Most importantly, it created a financial foundation for addressing the container's code compliance issues before the extended deadline expired. I can start Monday. Prefer first shift while I sort out transportation logistics. The container greeted Morgan with transformed environmental conditions upon her return from Peterson's. The accumulated insulation improvements had stabilized the interior temperature at 48 degrees despite external readings of 26 degrees, still cold by conventional standards, but representing remarkable progress from the initial differential of only 2-3 degrees. The roof modifications had maintained complete integrity during the previous night's precipitation, eliminating water intrusion entirely for the first time since acquisition. These physical improvements paralleled Morgan's psychological transformation. The employment offer had fundamentally altered her strategic calculations, from survival-focused resource conservation to investment-oriented development. The 30-day extension for code compliance, combined with incoming financial resources, created viable pathways toward legitimizing the container as either permanent or transitional housing, rather than merely extending its functional lifespan until forced abandonment. Morgan spent that afternoon at the repair shop, completing scheduled maintenance on 4 additional units while explaining the situation to the owner. His response balanced business pragmatism with unexpected support. "Can't blame you for taking real work in your field. Those engine repairs you've completed already put me ahead of schedule for the first time in 8 months. Come back any time you need extra cash. Weekends, evenings, whatever fits around your fabrication job. And bring anything mechanical you're struggling with for the container. Shop's got tools you can use if you need them." This arrangement preserved the supplemental income channel while maintaining access to specialized tools unavailable in Morgan's developing workspace. The owner's generosity transcended simple business considerations, suggesting genuine professional respect rather than merely transactional engagement. Morgan completed the day's repairs with particular attention to detail, not merely fulfilling contractual obligations, but establishing professional credibility that might yield future opportunities. The convenience store owner similarly supported Morgan's professional transition, responding to the news with practical assistance rather than disappointment at losing his newly discovered maintenance resource. "Saw a guy dropping off free moving boxes behind the liquor store yesterday. Might have some shipping materials you could use for that insulation project. And remind me before you leave today, got some discontinued work gloves that came in the wrong size. Supplier said donating them was cheaper than return shipping." By week's end, Morgan had established a methodical timeline for addressing the container's remaining critical modifications. The fabrication position would provide approximately $950 weekly after taxes, sufficient to acquire essential materials for code compliance while maintaining basic living expenses. The 60-day enforcement extension created adequate implementation time, particularly given Morgan's accelerated construction capabilities using proper tools rather than improvised alternatives. The most pressing compliance requirement, fire safety provisions, required both detection systems and egress modifications. Standard smoke detectors presented minimal installation challenges, but emergency exit creation required cutting through the container's steel wall to establish a secondary escape route, a complex structural modification demanding specialized tools and careful execution to avoid compromising the container's integrity. The Monday start date at Peterson's left the weekend available for critical container improvements. Morgan prioritized the emergency exit implementation, recognizing it represented both the most technically challenging requirement and the most visible compliance element for subsequent inspection. The design, developed during evening planning sessions, incorporated salvaged materials while meeting code specifications: minimum 24-inch width, swing-out opening mechanism, weather-sealed frame, and internal release mechanism accessible without special tools or keys. The structural modification process began with precise measurements in template creation. Using chalk lines and masking tape, Morgan marked the exact cutting pattern on both interior and exterior surfaces, incorporating reinforcement points to maintain structural integrity. The exterior template included proper header and threshold framing dimensions, while the interior markings indicated reinforcement plate positions designed to distribute loads away from the newly created opening. The actual cutting process presented technical challenges beyond Morgan's current equipment capabilities. The container's steel walls, while showing surface corrosion, maintained 14-gauge metal thickness specifically engineered to withstand structural loads during transport and stacking. Penetrating this material cleanly required either a plasma cutter or high-powered reciprocating saw with specialized metal cutting blades, tools unavailable through Morgan's existing resource channels. The repair shop owner provided the solution, offering after-hours access to the necessary equipment with professional guidance on proper cutting techniques for structural steel. The arrangement, 2 hours of shop organization in exchange for equipment usage, maintained mutual benefit without charity implications. Morgan spent Saturday morning meticulously arranging the shop's inventory, creating logical storage patterns that improved operational efficiency while establishing greater familiarity with the facility's resources. The cutting operation required precise execution to prevent structural compromise. Morgan deployed multiple techniques to control thermal expansion and potential warping, staged cutting patterns that allowed heat dissipation between sections, cooling compounds applied to cut edges, and temporary bracing to maintain dimensional stability throughout the process. These professional protocols transformed what might have been a destructive modification into controlled structural alteration, maintaining the container's integrity while creating the required emergency egress. Frame construction and installation demanded similar precision. The salvaged lumber required specific modifications to create weather-resistant joints capable of withstanding seasonal expansion/contraction cycles. Morgan utilized the shop's table saw and planer to mill consistent dimensions from inconsistent materials, creating professional quality components from discarded resources. The assembly process incorporated waterproof glue at all joinery points, stainless steel fasteners salvaged from the recycling center, and marine-grade caulking to ensure weather integrity. By Sunday evening, the emergency exit stood complete, fully operational, properly sealed against weather infiltration, and meeting all dimensional requirements specified in the building code. The technical quality far exceeded minimum compliance standards, demonstrating professional fabrication skills rather than expedient resolution. The finished installation, with its precisely aligned components and weather-resistant design, transformed what could have been merely a code requirement into a functional improvement that enhanced both safety and convenience. Monday morning brought the first shift at Peterson's, a 6:30 a.m. start time that required departure from the container at 5:45 to accommodate the 20-minute walk to the bus stop and subsequent 40-minute ride to the industrial district. The transit logistics consumed nearly 2 hours daily, but provided critical time for technical reading and container modification planning. Morgan utilized these periods to study compliance requirements for remaining code issues, developing material lists and implementation strategies that maximized efficiency during limited evening construction hours. The fabrication position itself presented both challenges and opportunities. The technical requirements matched Morgan's capabilities, but the organizational culture differed significantly from her previous workplace. Peterson's operated under strict production metrics, with individual performance tracked against established time standards for each welding process. This efficiency-focused environment contrasted with Gulf Coast's quality-centered approach, creating subtle pressures towards speed rather than precision, a fundamental tension for someone whose professional identity centered on technical excellence rather than production volume. Morgan navigated this cultural distinction by establishing a methodical workflow that maintained quality standards while steadily improving efficiency metrics. Rather than sacrificing technical standards for speed, she refined preparation procedures and optimized equipment settings to eliminate wasted movements and reduce non-productive time. By week's end, her production numbers had reached 85% of departmental standards while maintaining zero quality rejections, a performance balance that satisfied supervisory requirements without compromising professional integrity. The initial paychecks transformed Morgan's resource calculations dramatically. After 4 years of steadily diminishing financial reserves, the regular income created stability that enabled strategic planning rather than reactive survival. The mathematical projections shifted from days until depletion to weeks until specific improvement targets, a fundamental psychological reorientation from scarcity to development. This financial transition enabled accelerated container improvements, particularly regarding code compliance priorities. The electrical system requirements presented the next critical challenge, establishing safe power distribution that met current standards while accommodating the container's unique structural characteristics. The code specified minimum requirements: proper grounding systems, GFCI protection in wet locations, appropriate wire gauging for anticipated loads, and approved connection methods for all junctions. Morgan's technical training included basic electrical principles, but lacked the specific certification required for permitted installations. This created a compliance dilemma. Hiring a licensed electrician would cost approximately $1,200 for the required work, consuming more financial resources than currently available, while attempting unpermitted self-installation risked rejection during inspection. The solution emerged through strategic networking rather than financial allocation. The repair shop's parts supplier, who had observed Morgan's mechanical capabilities during her brief employment, operated a side business handling residential electrical installations. Their conversation during a chance encounter at the convenience store revealed potential collaboration opportunities. Need someone with electrical certification to sign off on your container project? I could review your installation, make any necessary corrections, and provide the documentation for about half what you'd pay a full-service electrician. You do the labor, I'll handle the paperwork and final connections. This arrangement optimized both financial and technical resources. Morgan could install the basic wiring infrastructure utilizing her fabrication knowledge, while leveraging the electrician's certification for compliance documentation. The reduced cost, approximately $550 versus $1,200, fit within the available budget while ensuring professional standards and regulatory approval. The electrical installation process began with detailed planning, load calculations for anticipated usage, circuit mapping to optimize distribution efficiency, and material specifications that balance code requirements against resource constraints. Morgan utilized evenings after fabrication shifts to develop comprehensive documentation, creating professional quality diagrams that detailed every circuit, junction box, and outlet location throughout the container. The actual installation occurred during weekend hours, with Morgan executing the physical work while consulting the electrician through photos and video calls at critical decision points. The container's metal construction required specialized approaches to ensure proper grounding and prevent electrical conductivity through the structure itself. Morgan installed dedicated grounding systems, isolated all wiring within appropriate conduit, and established junction boxes with proper strain relief at all penetration points. By the third weekend, the electrical system stood complete but disconnected. All internal wiring installed per code requirements, service panel mounted and properly configured, outlet and switch locations operational but isolated from power supply. The electrician's final inspection and connection to temporary power revealed zero deficiencies, with documentation approved for submission to code enforcement. This critical compliance milestone represented the first formally documented improvement specifically addressing the violation notice requirements. The sanitation provisions specified in the code created more complex challenges, particularly given the container's location on undeveloped property without municipal water or sewer connections. The requirements demanded approved waste management systems for both gray water from sinks, showers, and black water from toilets. Infrastructure typically requiring permanent connections to municipal services or engineered septic systems costing thousands of dollars. Morgan's research into alternative dwelling regulations revealed potential compliance pathways through self-contained systems rather than permanent connections. The technical manual sections on marine sanitation systems provided conceptual frameworks adaptable to terrestrial applications, holding tanks with scheduled pump-out service, gray water filtration systems for irrigation usage, and composting toilet technologies that eliminated black water production entirely. These alternative approaches required variance approval rather than standard compliance, creating additional bureaucratic challenges, but offering financially viable solutions compatible with the container's physical limitations. Morgan developed comprehensive documentation detailing proposed systems, implementation timelines, and maintenance protocols designed to demonstrate regulatory compliance through alternative methods rather than conventional infrastructure. The Community Development Department's reaction to these alternative proposals revealed the fundamental bureaucratic resistance embedded within regulatory systems. Despite the code explicitly allowing variance applications for alternative dwelling structures, the practical implementation remained deliberately inaccessible through administrative friction, extended processing timelines, ambiguous documentation requirements, and sequential approval processes designed to discourage completion rather than facilitate compliance. Morgan navigated this bureaucratic labyrinth by applying the same systematic problem-solving approaches that characterized her technical work. Rather than engaging the process through standard channels, intake forms, general information requests, scheduled appointments, she identified the specific individuals with decision-making authority and established direct communication channels that bypassed administrative gatekeeping. The department director, a career civil servant named Martin Reynolds with 27 years in municipal government, initially presented as the embodiment of bureaucratic resistance. His office projected deliberate inaccessibility through multiple administrative layers, appointment requirements extending weeks into the future, and communication protocols designed to minimize direct engagement with applicants. Morgan circumvented these barriers by identifying his actual daily patterns rather than his official availability. Municipal board meetings publicly documented in meeting minutes revealed his consistent attendance at Wednesday morning planning sessions. The coffee shop across from City Hall provided the perfect interception point, allowing unscheduled interaction in a neutral environment without administrative interference. Their accidental encounter, carefully orchestrated through precise timing and position presence, created opportunity for direct communication outside formal channels. Morgan approached the interaction with professional focus rather than personal appeal, presenting technical documentation and specific regulatory questions that demonstrated comprehensive understanding rather than desperate supplication. I've identified a potential compliance pathway for alternative dwelling sanitation systems under Municipal Code Section 423.7.3 regarding self-contained waste management. The variance application process seems designed for conventional construction timelines rather than the 30-day enforcement window. Is there an administrative mechanism for aligning these conflicting regulatory timeframes? The question, technically precise and administratively sophisticated, shifted the interaction dynamic immediately. Reynolds' expression transformed from bureaucratic neutrality to professional engagement as he recognized the conversation had moved beyond standard compliance complaints to substantive regulatory analysis. Their discussion, initially constrained to the brief coffee shop encounter, extended to an impromptu walking meeting as they headed towards City Hall. By conversation's end, Reynolds had provided critical administrative intelligence. The existence of a provisional compliance designation specifically designed for transitional situations, documentation requirements substantially reduced from standard variance applications, and direct submission protocols that bypass normal intake processes. This information, unavailable through any published sources or frontline administrative channels, created a viable compliance pathway aligned with Morgan's timeline and resource constraints. The provisional compliance application required submission within 72 hours to meet processing deadlines before the next code enforcement inspection cycle. Morgan dedicated every non-working hour to document preparation, detailed technical specifications for all implemented improvements, photographic evidence of completed modifications, and comprehensive plans for remaining compliance elements with specific timeline commitments. The submission packet, hand-delivered to Reynolds' office per his instructions, represented professional quality documentation exceeding standard requirements. The technical precision, regulatory language alignment, and comprehensive scope distinguished it from typical compliance responses, establishing credibility through demonstrated capability rather than promised intent. The waiting period between submission and determination created both practical and psychological challenges. Morgan continued container improvements according to the documented timeline, focusing on remaining fire safety elements, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide monitoring, fire extinguisher installation, and emergency lighting systems. These modifications proceeded efficiently, given their straightforward technical requirements, but the provisional approval's uncertainty generated underlying tension that complicated even basic tasks. The code enforcement officer's follow-up inspection occurred exactly 15 days after the initial extension, precisely halfway through the 60-day compliance window. His arrival, unannounced but anticipated within the general timeframe, found Morgan installing the final smoke detector, creating an immediate demonstration of active compliance efforts rather than merely documented intentions. The inspection process revealed the officer's evolving perspective. His initial visit had maintained professional detachment, evaluating the container purely against regulatory requirements without contextual consideration. This follow-up assessment incorporated both technical compliance evaluation and qualitative judgments about improvement progress and inhabitant capability. His inspection notes documented completed modifications in considerable detail: emergency exit dimensions and functionality, electrical system, certification, and safety features, insulation improvements, and thermal management capabilities. These observations extended beyond minimum compliance verification to include professional quality assessments, noting construction standards exceeding code requirements in multiple areas. The final inspection notes included a critical recommendation: provisional compliance approval recommended based on demonstrated technical capability, substantial completion of life safety requirements, and documented implementation timeline for remaining modifications. This administrative language, precisely aligned with Reynolds' procedural guidance, effectively created the regulatory bridge between standard enforcement timelines and practical implementation constraints. 3 days later, the official determination arrived via certified mail. Provisional compliance status granted, stamped across the top of the form, with specific conditions listed below. The bureaucratic language contained remarkable flexibility within its technical precision: 90 additional days for complete compliance implementation, biweekly progress documentation requirements, and final inspection scheduling options aligned with construction completion rather than arbitrary deadlines. This regulatory milestone transformed the container's status from unauthorized structure to conditionally approved dwelling, a categorical shift with implications beyond mere enforcement relief. The provisional approval established legal recognition that fundamentally altered Morgan's relationship with both the property and surrounding community. The container was no longer merely personal shelter. It had become a legitimized housing alternative with documented standing in municipal systems. The psychological impact exceeded even the practical benefits. After months of existing in regulatory shadows, technically present but officially invisible, Morgan had established legitimate status within community frameworks. The container's evolution from desperate measure to recognized dwelling paralleled her own transition from economic casualty to rebuilding professional. Both transformations remained incomplete, but their trajectories had shifted from defense against deterioration to progressive improvement toward defined standards. The provisional approval coincided with Morgan's 1-month employment anniversary at Peterson's, marking a critical transition in professional status. The probationary evaluation included both production metrics and quality assessments, creating comprehensive performance documentation that exceeded departmental standards in multiple categories. The formal review included an unexpected development, accelerated advancement to pressure vessel specialist classification with corresponding compensation increase to $31.75 hourly. The production manager's evaluation comments revealed specific recognition of technical capabilities beyond standard expectations, demonstrates exceptional material knowledge and process control. Certification capabilities significantly exceed current assignment requirements. Recommended for specialized projects requiring titanium certification and high-pressure applications. This professional validation, combined with a provisional compliance approval, created momentum that accelerated container improvements beyond regulatory requirements. Morgan's focus expanded from minimum standards, satisfaction, to optimized functionality, transforming basic shelter into tailored living space specifically designed around her requirements and capabilities. The interior layout evolved from survival-focused minimalism to efficiency-oriented design. The workbench expanded into a proper fabrication station with specialized tool storage and material organization systems. The sleeping area transformed from basic platform to space-efficient design incorporating storage compartments within the raised structure. The kitchen area developed from simple shelf with camping stove to functional food preparation space with salvaged sink connected to the newly approved gray water system. These improvements consume financial resources beyond minimum compliance requirements, but the investment logic had fundamentally shifted. The container no longer represented temporary shelter until conventional housing became accessible. It had evolved into a legitimate alternative with distinct advantages specifically aligned with Morgan's circumstances. The absence of conventional mortgage or rental costs created financial opportunities for specialized modifications that transformed generic cargo container into custom living space. The community perception evolved parallel to these physical transformations. The initial video mockery had diminished as visible improvements accumulated, replaced first by curious observation and eventually by cautious engagement. Neighbors who had previously participated in ridicule began to display hesitant interest, occasionally stopping to ask questions about specific modifications or construction techniques. The corner store owner became an unexpected advocate, defending the container project against lingering criticism while highlighting its evolution from desperate measure to innovative solution. His perspective, coming from an established community member rather than an outside supporter, Benjamin, carried particular credibility among local residents, gradually shifting the neighborhood narrative from container eyesore to interesting project. This community transition accelerated when Peterson's Metal Fabrication featured Morgan's container project in their employee newsletter, highlighting the technical innovations implemented with minimal resources. The article, titled "Engineering Solutions Beyond the Workplace," included professional quality photographs documenting the container's transformation from standard shipping unit to functional dwelling. The public recognition from an established industrial employer provided institutional validation that transcended individual opinion, establishing the project's legitimacy through professional assessment rather than personal judgment. The article's distribution beyond Peterson's employee network created unexpected opportunities. A local technical college instructor teaching sustainable construction methods contacted Morgan about presenting the container project to students as practical case study in adaptive reuse and alternative dwelling concepts. The initial request, documentation sharing, and possible site visit expanded into invitation for guest lecture, focusing on practical implementation of theoretical sustainability principles. Morgan's presentation to the technical college students represented a transformative moment in both project development and personal identity. Standing before 27 students and 2 instructors, she detailed the container's evolution from desperate survival measure to engineered dwelling through systematic problem-solving and technical knowledge application. The presentation focused on practical methodology rather than theoretical concepts, specific challenges encountered, technical solutions implemented, and regulatory hurdles navigated throughout the development process. The student-asked questions revealed both technical curiosity and shifting perspectives on housing alternatives. Their inquiries ranged from specific construction details to broader regulatory and economic considerations, the intersection between building codes and housing accessibility, financial calculations comparing container adaptation to conventional housing costs, and technical challenges of repurposing industrial materials for residential applications. The concluding question, posed by a female student in the front row, transcended technical specifics to address the project's fundamental nature. At what point did this stop being just survival and become something you were actually building on purpose? The query crystallized the container's evolution in unexpectedly profound terms. Morgan's response emerged not from prepared notes, but from realized truth. The transition happened when I stopped measuring progress against what I'd lost and started evaluating it against what I was creating. Desperation builds shelters. Determination builds homes. This philosophical distinction accurately captured the container's developmental arc, from emergency measure against homelessness to purposeful creation aligned with specific needs and capabilities. The physical structure remained fundamentally unchanged. 40 feet of steel box originally designed for cargo transport, but its functional reality had transformed through intentional modification and conceptual reframing. The technical college presentation generated practical opportunities beyond philosophical clarity. Two students approached afterward with specific technical questions related to their own container adaptation projects. The instructor inquired about potential internship opportunities at Peterson's for students focusing on industrial applications of sustainable design principles. A local reporter covering the presentation for the college newsletter requested follow-up interview focusing on affordable housing alternatives in post-industrial communities. These connections expanded Morgan's network beyond immediate employment and neighborhood contexts, establishing her container project as reference point for alternative approaches to both housing challenges and career disruption. The narrative had evolved from individual struggle to potential template, from cautionary tale about economic vulnerability to instructive example of technical resilience. The final code compliance inspection, scheduled for the conclusion of the provisional approval period, found the container meeting or exceeding all specified requirements. The emergency exit had weathered multiple seasonal cycles without structural or weatherproofing compromises. The electrical system had operated continuously without safety incidents or technical failures. The alternative sanitation systems had demonstrated effective waste management without environmental impact or maintenance complications. The inspection report, submitted with unusually detailed technical assessment, concluded with an unexpected administrative recommendation. Structure exceeds minimum requirements for alternative dwelling classification. Recommend permanent approval under emerging housing solutions, provision with standard annual inspection protocols rather than conditional status limitations. This recommendation, originating from the same code enforcement officer who had issued the original violation notice, represented complete regulatory transformation. The container had progressed from unauthorized structure facing potential removal to officially recognized dwelling exceeding standard requirements. This administrative evolution paralleled the physical transformation from basic cargo container to functional living space specifically adapted for sustainable occupancy. The final approval documentation arrived 3 weeks later, confirming permanent dwelling classification with standard inspection and maintenance requirements rather than conditional limitations. The bureaucratic language contains subtle but significant recognition. Innovative application of alternative construction methodologies while maintaining safety and habitability standards consistent with municipal housing requirements. This administrative milestone coincided with Morgan's 6-month employment anniversary at Peterson's, marking her eligibility for comprehensive benefits, including medical insurance, retirement program participation, and advanced training opportunities. The timing created natural opportunity for strategic assessment, evaluating both professional trajectory and housing situation against evolving priorities and capabilities. The container, now legally established as permanent dwelling, presented both advantages and limitations for long-term planning. Its financial efficiency remained unmatched by conventional housing options, with total investment approximately $7,400, including initial purchase, transport, materials, and inspection fees, compared to minimum $1,400 monthly for equivalent apartment space. The location offered reasonable proximity to employment while maintaining independence from traditional rental markets and their associated financial vulnerabilities. These practical benefits balanced against inherent limitations, restricted square footage, constraining future expansion, non-traditional construction, potentially complicating insurance and property valuation, and lingering social perceptions despite regulatory approval and physical improvements. The objective assessment acknowledged both genuine advantages and realistic constraints, avoiding both overly optimistic projection and unnecessarily pessimistic limitation. Morgan's professional evaluation revealed similar balanced assessment. The fabrication position at Peterson's had restored financial stability and professional credibility, with compensation reaching approximately 70% of previous earnings through advancement and certification recognition. The work utilized her technical capabilities while providing steady income and benefits security essential for long-term planning. These substantial advantages balanced against reduced compensation compared to specialized marine applications and limited advancement opportunities within the company's established organizational structure. This dual evaluation, professional position and housing situation, created framework for strategic planning rather than reactive survival. The container's completed status as legally approved dwelling provided stable foundation, while employment stability enabled resource accumulation for future opportunities. The combination established sustainable, present circumstances while maintaining flexibility for continued improvement rather than merely defending against deterioration. Morgan implemented this strategic perspective through systematic resource allocation, establishing emergency savings reserve for future economic disruptions, investing in specialized tools that expanded both container improvement capabilities and potential independent work opportunities, and developing professional networks beyond immediate employment context. The container's interior continued evolving beyond minimum habitability standards toward optimized functionality. The sleeping area transformed from basic platform to space-efficient design with integrated storage. The workbench expanded into comprehensive fabrication station, supporting potential independent projects. The kitchen area developed from simple food preparation space to efficient cooking station with salvaged appliances and purpose-built storage solutions. The exterior improvements balance functional necessity against aesthetic considerations, acknowledging the container's visual impact on surrounding community. Weatherproof paint in neutral gray replaced the fading blue with its shipping company logos and industrial markings. Strategically positioned planters with native species created visual softening while requiring minimal maintenance. Simple landscape improvements transformed the lot from weedy gravel patch to intentional outdoor space, complementing the container's design purpose. These continuing modifications demonstrated critical distinction between mere completion and purposeful development, between reaching minimum standards and creating optimized environment. The container had evolved from desperate survival measure to intentional housing alternative specifically adapted to Morgan's circumstances and capabilities. This evolution paralleled Morgan's professional and personal reconstruction. The technical skills that had defined her career before economic disruption now shape both employment contribution and independent development. The resourcefulness born from financial necessity had transformed into strategic capability applied to purposeful improvement rather than desperate adaptation. 6 months after receiving permanent dwelling approval, approximately 14 months after the container's initial placement on the vacant lot, Morgan received unexpected communication from Gulf Coast Marine Repairs. The message, delivered via official company letterhead rather than informal channels, contained formal employment offer for specialized welder position focusing exclusively on high-value aluminum and titanium applications. The compensation package, $37.50 hourly plus benefits exceeding industry standards, represented full restoration of professional standing with additional advancement based on specialized certification capabilities. The position description explicitly acknowledged gender-neutral hiring policies recently implemented following internal review and policy revision. Tacit acknowledgement of previous discrimination without direct admission of specific violations. This opportunity, arriving after extended reconstruction period rather than during immediate crisis, created fundamentally different decision parameters. Rather than desperate acceptance of any available opportunity, Morgan could evaluate the offer against established stability and continuing development. The higher compensation and specialized technical focus presented genuine advantages, But returning to the company that had discarded her specialized skills during economic contraction carried both practical and psychological complications. The decision process incorporated multiple factors beyond simple financial comparison. The container's established status as permanent dwelling eliminated housing urgency that might otherwise prioritize immediate income maximization. Peterson's continuing operations provided stable employment without disruption risks, while the repair shop connection maintained supplemental income channels. These established foundations enabled decision-making based on professional development rather than survival necessity. Morgan's response to Gulf Coast reflected this strategic positioning. Would consider position at $42.50 an hourly rate, reflecting specialized certification package, and demonstrated reliability through economic cycles. Available for discussion regarding specific project requirements and potential consulting arrangement rather than standard employment classification. This counteroffer, professional rather than desperate, specific rather than general, confident rather than supplicating, demonstrated fundamental transformation in both circumstance and self-perception. Morgan was no longer merely seeking employment. She was negotiating professional engagement based on documented capabilities and established market value. The negotiation process extended over 3 weeks, with Gulf Coast initially rejecting the proposed compensation adjustment, but eventually accepting modified terms. $39.75 hourly, with performance bonuses potentially reaching original requested rate, plus consulting classification for specific projects rather than standard employment status. This arrangement preserved independent contractor designation while providing access to specialized projects requiring specific certification credentials. The final agreement created optimal combination of stability and opportunity, continued base employment at Peterson's providing consistent income and benefits security, supplemented by specialized consulting engagements with Gulf Coast utilizing advanced certification capabilities at premium compensation rates. This hybrid approach maintained financial stability while creating advancement opportunities without dependency on single employer vulnerable to economic fluctuations. This professional resolution complemented the container's evolution from emergency shelter to intentional dwelling. Both transformations represented systematic reconstruction rather than desperate adaptation, purposeful development aligned with specific capabilities and priorities rather than merely defensive responses to external circumstances. The container and career had progressed along parallel paths from crisis management to strategic implementation, each reinforcing the other's development through expanded resources and improved stability. The container's final form bore little resemblance to its original state beyond basic dimensional parameters. The interior featured purpose-designed zones for specific functions: sleeping area with integrated storage, kitchen space with efficient organization, workspace supporting both maintenance activities and potential income-generating projects. The exterior presented intentional appearance rather than industrial leftover. Neutral color scheme, strategic landscaping, and purposeful modifications communicating deliberate design rather than desperate adaptation. These physical transformations reflected deeper evolution in both function and meaning. What began as last resort shelter against homelessness had developed into purposeful dwelling specifically adapted to occupant requirements. The structure that initially represented profound economic vulnerability had become visible demonstration of technical capability and systematic problem solving. The container had transformed from evidence of how far Morgan had fallen to proof of how much she could build from minimal resources through applied knowledge and persistent effort. This evolution reflected fundamental truth about both structures and lives. Their meaning derives not from original purpose or external appearance, but from intentional adaptation and continued development. The container remained fundamentally steel box designed for cargo transport, just as Morgan remained skilled tradesperson disrupted by economic contraction. But both had evolved beyond original limitations through purposeful modification and strategic development, creating new realities that acknowledge past constraints without being defined by them. 1 year after receiving permanent dwelling approval, Morgan hosted an informal gathering at the container for individuals who had contributed to its development: the repair shop owner who had provided critical tools and connections, the convenience store owner, whose early support had bridged survival gaps, the code enforcement officer, whose regulatory flexibility had enabled legitimate development, and several Peterson's colleagues whose technical assistance had facilitated specific improvements. The gathering, not quite housewarming, but similarly purposeful, marked transition from development project to established dwelling. The container no longer represented work in progress requiring explanation and justification. It had become simply home, as legitimate and functional as any conventional structure serving identical purpose. The visitors' reactions revealed the container's complete transformation from curiosity to achievement. Their questions focused on specific technical solutions rather than basic habitability concerns. The rainwater collection system's filtration efficiency, the solar panel array's capacity relative to consumption requirements, the thermal management system's seasonal adaptation capabilities. These inquiries acknowledge the container as engineered dwelling rather than desperate adaptation, recognizing technical accomplishment rather than merely survival mechanism. As twilight settled over the gathering, conversation shifted from technical specifics to broader implications. The repair shop owner, surveying the container's evolution from basic shell to fully functional dwelling, articulated the transformation's fundamental significance beyond specific implementation details. You've done more than just fix up a container. You've built the visible proof that expertise matters more than circumstance, that knowing how to build something is more valuable than having everything already built for you. That's a lesson this town needed reminding about. This observation captured essential truth about both the container and its creator. They had evolved beyond immediate circumstances through applied knowledge rather than external resources. The physical structure demonstrated capabilities transcending financial limitations, just as Morgan's professional reconstruction illustrated resilience beyond economic disruption. Both represented the particular strength derived from technical capability in systematic problem-solving applied to specific challenges rather than generic solutions. As the visitors departed, leaving Morgan alone in the container that had evolved from desperate shelter to intentional home, the structure's significance crystallized beyond its physical parameters. The container represented not merely dwelling but demonstration, visible evidence that circumstances need not define capabilities, that technical knowledge creates options beyond financial resources, that rebuilding requires different skills than maintaining, but produces stronger results through intentional design rather than conventional assumption. The container would continue evolving through further modifications and improvements, just as Morgan's professional path would develop through additional opportunities and specialized applications. Neither had reached final form because neither was defined by completion, but rather by continuous development aligned with emerging requirements and expanding capabilities. The container, like its inhabitant, had established sustainable foundation for continued growth rather than merely surviving immediate crisis. This fundamental resilience, the capacity to rebuild rather than merely endure, represented the container's most significant achievement beyond specific technical solutions or regulatory approvals. The structure demonstrated that starting points need not determine endpoints, that physical constraints yield to applied knowledge, that circumstances present challenges rather than limitations for those possessing both technical capability and persistent determination. The lesson extended beyond individual experience to broader application, relevant to communities facing economic disruption, individuals navigating career displacement, and housing systems addressing affordability challenges. The container offered operational template rather than merely inspirational example, specific technical approaches, regulatory navigation strategies, and resource optimization methods applicable across diverse circumstances and requirements. Morgan recognized this broader significance as she prepared for sleep in the dwelling that had evolved from desperate measure to purposeful creation. The container's journey from industrial cargo unit to engineered living space paralleled her own transition from economic casualty to rebuilding professional. Both transformations had required the same essential elements: technical knowledge providing framework for possibility, systematic problem-solving applied to specific challenges, and persistent effort converting theoretical potential into practical reality. The container's metal walls now represented boundaries of possibility rather than limitations of circumstance. defining space for continued development rather than constraining potential through original design parameters. The structure that had begun as evidence of economic vulnerability had become demonstration of technical capability, visible proof that starting points need not determine endpoints when knowledge provides foundation for reconstruction rather than mere adaptation. This evolution from survival to creation, from necessity to intention, from adaptation to design, represented the container's fundamental achievement beyond specific technical modifications or regulatory approvals. The structure demonstrated essential truth applicable far beyond its particular circumstances. Rebuilding something broken often produces stronger results than maintaining something that merely functions without purpose.